The courtroom buzzed with an electric tension. Every eye in the room was fixed on the scene unfolding at the center of the grand, cold, marble hall. The clock ticked loudly in the silence as a single figure sat at the defendant's table, his posture uncharacteristically stiff. Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized technology, space exploration, and even transportation, appeared far less confident than usual. His sharp gaze flickered nervously from the judge's bench to his lawyers, his usual bravado missing. Across the room, sitting like a stone monument, was Judge Margaret Blake. Tall, composed, and with a reputation that commanded immediate respect, she had been a formidable force in the courtroom for years. Today, however, she wasn't just any judge, she was the judge who was about to take on Elon Musk in a legal battle that could change the course of his career forever. Her reputation was built on justice, fairness, and unyielding resolve. But something about her today was different. There was a glint in her eyes that suggested a certain level of personal satisfaction, like a hunter about to catch her prey. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice deep, measured, and unyielding. "You thought you could manipulate the system. That you could silence the voices of those who stand in your way. But what happens next, Mr. Musk, is not just about money. It's about accountability." Elon's face tightened. He straightened in his seat, but there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. This wasn't a typical court session. This wasn't just about some lawsuit, it was personal. The world was watching. The courtroom cameras were rolling, broadcasting the tense moment to millions. News outlets had already latched onto the drama. Elon Musk faces ruthless justice from female judge. Social media was abuzz, with hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #Elon vs Blake trending globally. Everyone was intrigued. But what exactly was going on? Why was Elon Musk, the billionaire genius behind SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink, sitting in a courtroom, fighting for his future? Musk had never imagined that one day his empire would be at risk, not because of his grand ideas, but because of his actions. His companies were revolutionary, but the recent scandal involving one of his most ambitious projects, a global communications satellite network, had put everything he had built on the line. The project, once hailed as the next big leap for humanity, had turned into a financial disaster. Billions were lost, investors were angry, and the legal suits began piling up. And now, there was Judge Margaret Blake. She wasn't just any judge. She was known for her tough stance against the powerful elite, someone who had built a reputation on holding those in charge accountable, no matter who they were. Her no-nonsense approach had earned her both admiration and fear across the country. No one had ever truly gotten away from her once she had them in her sights. And Elon Musk, the world's most influential tech mogul, was now squarely in her crosshairs. "You will pay for the damages you've caused, Mr. Musk," Judge Blake continued, her voice steady and piercing. "Not just to the shareholders or the investors, but to every single person who trusted you. You have deceived them. And you will answer for that." The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Musk's mind raced. This wasn't the plan. He was used to bending the rules, using his wealth and influence to navigate tricky situations. But now, facing Judge Blake, it felt like he was up against something far more powerful than any courtroom lawyer or lobbyist. His legal team had been preparing for this day for months. They had combed through every piece of evidence, every contract, and every loophole in the system. But nothing had prepared them for this. Nothing had prepared them for the relentless fire of Judge Blake's questioning and the relentless intensity of the trial. Every move Musk made seemed to be met with a response that put him further into a corner. "I've given you the opportunity to settle this privately, Mr. Musk," Judge Blake said, her tone unforgiving. "You chose to ignore that. You chose to drag this through the mud. So now we'll deal with it the only way we know how. You will face the consequences of your actions." Elon swallowed hard. He wasn't used to feeling this way. He was the one who made history, who set the course for the future, who had changed the world with his ideas. Yet, here he was, facing an overwhelming adversary. The weight of the courtroom settled on his shoulders like a 100-ton stone. This wasn't about rockets or electric cars. This was about his character. His legacy. "You can't do this," Elon muttered under his breath, though it was clear no one was supposed to hear. The words slipped out before he could stop them. "Oh, but I can," Judge Blake said with a cold smile, her gaze never leaving him. "I've made it my mission to make sure that no one, no matter how powerful, can escape accountability. Not even you, Mr. Musk." Musk's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had built an empire, but today, it felt like it was all crumbling. The courtroom murmured as the tension grew thicker, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The outside world, the news, the cameras, it all disappeared. The only thing left was the battle in front of him. And in that battle, Musk realized something: he was fighting not just for his business or his empire, but for his very future. His identity. His reputation. But then, just as the silence became unbearable, Judge Blake delivered the final blow. "The truth, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice louder now, "is something you can't escape. No matter how high you build your rockets, no matter how much money you make. The truth will find you." The courtroom was on edge. What would happen next? Could Musk turn things around, or was this the moment his empire would begin to fall apart? With one final glance at Judge Blake, Elon Musk knew that this trial was far from over, and that the next few weeks would change everything he thought he knew about power, influence, and the law. But there was something else in the air. A feeling of uncertainty. A hint of something more, a twist, a secret, a revelation that would soon come to light and rock the world. The trial was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been a man driven by ambition. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, he had a mind that was always ahead of its time. From an early age, his interests in technology, science, and invention were apparent. But his genius wasn't always recognized by the world, and he wasn't always the media titan he was known as today. His path to success had been filled with challenges, some of which were far more personal than people ever realized. Elon's father, Elon Musk, was a complex figure in his life. Often cold, critical, and distant, Elon wasn't the kind of father who showered his son with affection or praise. Instead, Elon grew up in an environment that could be described as emotionally turbulent, a pattern that would persist into adulthood. His mother, May Musk, on the other hand, was a strong and resilient woman who encouraged his dreams. May was a model and dietitian, who raised Elon and his siblings with a sense of independence and self-sufficiency. At 12, Elon taught himself computer programming and created a video game, Blaster, which he sold for $500. Even then, his entrepreneurial spark was apparent. However, it wasn't just his technical prowess that would define him, but his relentless determination. Elon wasn't interested in following the beaten path, he wanted to change the world. He wanted to be at the forefront of something monumental. And as he grew older, that drive only intensified. After moving to Canada and eventually the United States, Musk enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. But he wasn't content with simply attending class. Elon quickly became known as the kind of person who had his eyes set on something bigger. He dropped out of Stanford after just 2 days to pursue his vision of creating a future filled with possibilities. That decision would prove to be pivotal. He was following his own instincts, and it would lead him into the world of tech, where he would eventually co-found companies like PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink. PayPal was his first real success. Elon had founded X.com, a payment company, which would later merge with Confinity to form PayPal. By the time eBay bought PayPal in 2002, Musk walked away with $165 million. But, as ambitious as Musk was, money wasn't his ultimate goal. He saw the acquisition as a stepping stone. A way to fund his next great adventure. That's when SpaceX was born. Musk's dream of revolutionizing space exploration and making human life multiplanetary became the driving force behind his work. It wasn't just about rockets, it was about humanity's future. It was about pushing the boundaries of possibility. SpaceX's early years were a mix of failure and triumph. There were times when the company seemed on the brink of collapse. Rocket after rocket failed to launch successfully. Musk's critics were quick to declare that he was overestimating his own genius. But Musk didn't give up. In 2008, after nearly bankrupting himself to fund SpaceX, his third rocket finally succeeded. That success would not only cement Musk's place in the world of space exploration but would also pave the way for everything that followed: Tesla, the electric car company, which would change the automotive industry; Neuralink, which aimed to merge human minds with machines; and the Boring Company, which envisioned a network of underground tunnels to solve traffic problems. But, of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Musk's aggressive approach to business, his pursuit of world-changing technology, and his personality often rubbed people the wrong way. He was notorious for his controversial statements and unfiltered tweets, many of which led to legal battles and stock market fluctuations. Still, Musk thrived in the chaos. He built companies not just for profit, but with a vision of the future. His companies were innovative, disruptive, and visionary, but they also often came with a price. His work ethic was legendary. Elon had often stated that he slept on the floor of his office and worked 100-hour weeks. He believed in the impossible, sometimes to his own detriment. But that passion, that intense drive, was what made him a leader. To some, he was a genius who could do no wrong, but to others, he was a chaotic and unpredictable force who was difficult to understand and even harder to trust. The world had witnessed his rise, but no one knew the pressure that Musk was under behind closed doors. Even with his wealth, even with the countless accolades, there was a constant, gnawing pressure to be better, faster, more innovative. His family, his businesses, and even his public persona were all riding on his ability to deliver the future he promised. And it wasn't just the tech world that was watching him now. Every move Musk made had the potential to affect the global economy, the environment, and even geopolitics. But this legal battle was different. This wasn't about his success or failure in the tech world, this was about his reputation, his legacy. This was about proving he could be held accountable just like anyone else. Musk had fought against so many odds throughout his life, but now he was facing something he couldn't outwit or outmaneuver: Judge Margaret Blake. The courtroom drama was not just a collision of legal minds, it was the clash of two forces, one that represented the future of technology, and the other that stood as a pillar of justice and accountability. Both had already shaped history in their own ways. But today, their paths would cross, and the world would be watching. And as Musk sat there, fighting back the nerves, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the end of his empire, or the beginning of something even greater? The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken, and the tension was palpable. Judge Margaret Blake had just delivered a speech that struck Musk like a punch to the gut. For a man used to controlling situations and manipulating outcomes, this was a rare moment of vulnerability. The world had watched him rise from a young, ambitious tech entrepreneur to one of the richest men alive. But in that instant, sitting across from the relentless gaze of Judge Blake, he felt like a mere mortal again, facing the consequences of his past decisions. As the judge continued to lay out the gravity of the case against him, Musk's thoughts began to spiral. He had never imagined that it would come to this. This trial was no ordinary lawsuit. This was personal. The very core of his identity was at stake. How could he, a man who had achieved so much, have his legacy threatened in this way? And yet, here he was, sitting in the hot seat, surrounded by a courtroom full of eyes that were all fixated on him. Judge Blake's voice boomed in the silence, cutting through his thoughts. "Mr. Musk, your actions have caused irreparable damage to your investors, your customers, and to the industry you claimed to revolutionize. Do you understand the weight of what's at stake here? Her words were sharp, like daggers piercing the air, and Musk felt every single one of them. He shifted in his seat, trying to maintain his usual composed exterior, but his palms were sweaty. For the first time in a long while, he felt exposed. Vulnerable. It wasn't just about rockets or cars anymore. It wasn't just about numbers or patents. This was a matter of his character. His integrity. The charges against Musk were serious. It wasn't just one isolated mistake. There were multiple claims of negligence, fraud, and manipulation surrounding his satellite internet project. Musk had launched the ambitious project, aiming to provide high-speed internet to remote parts of the world. But instead of solving the global connectivity problem, it had resulted in a series of failures, technical, financial, and ethical. At the heart of the issue was the lack of transparency. Musk had touted the project as a game-changer, claiming it would revolutionize internet access for millions. But the reality was far more complicated. The satellites weren't delivering as promised, and investors were left in the dark about the growing technical and financial issues. Worse still, there were whispers of cover-ups, of numbers being fudged, and timelines being manipulated to avoid public backlash. All of this was now being scrutinized under the harsh spotlight of Judge Blake's courtroom. "Mr. Musk, you've had your fair share of public successes," Blake continued, her tone unwavering. "But now, you must face the consequences of your failures. Do you understand that?" Musk took a deep breath and tried to steady his nerves. He'd been in tight spots before. He'd faced ridicule, rejection, and failure, only to rise again. He was a fighter. But this was different. This was not just a case of bouncing back from a business failure. This was about public perception. This was about the loss of trust. "Your Honor," Musk said, his voice steady, but with an edge of frustration creeping in, "this is an incredibly complex situation. The satellite project was never meant to be a failure. Yes, there were setbacks, but we are making progress. I've never promised perfection, but I've always promised innovation and improvement. And I stand by that." Blake didn't flinch. "Progress, Mr. Musk, is not the same as deception. Your investors were misled. Your customers were misled. And now we find ourselves here, with your empire at risk." The courtroom was still, with no one daring to speak. Every word felt like a strike, and Musk could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The walls felt like they were closing in, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this trial was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. The media had already pounced on the case. Headlines screamed about his downfall, Musk's dream turns into a nightmare, the rise and fall of Elon Musk faces reckoning in court. Social media had exploded with every twist and turn of the trial. The public, which had once celebrated his achievements, now turned its gaze on him with a sense of betrayal. People were starting to question whether the man they had once admired was truly as visionary as he claimed or just another flawed billionaire who played fast and loose with the truth. As Musk tried to keep his composure, he couldn't help but feel the weight of those questioning eyes. Investors were pulling out of his ventures. His reputation was on the line. And the worst part? He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to it. Meanwhile, Judge Blake remained unmoved. She had heard the defense before, the pleas for understanding, the promises of redemption. She wasn't here to be swayed by charisma or charm. She was here to deliver justice. And justice, in her eyes, was non-negotiable. "You will have your day in court, Mr. Musk," she said. "But understand this, I will not be intimidated by your wealth, your influence, or your reputation. This trial will be about the truth, and nothing more." Musk nodded, but inside, the pressure was building. The realization was setting in, this trial wasn't just a battle for the future of his companies, it was a battle for his very identity. The man who had once been hailed as a genius, a visionary, was now being painted as a corporate villain. The public's perception of him was shifting. How could he fight back against that? Just then, Musk's lawyer, a seasoned litigator named Richard Graham, leaned over and whispered in his ear. "We need to start playing offense, Elon. Judge Blake isn't going to make this easy, but we have to show her we're not backing down." Elon took a deep breath and nodded, trying to gather his thoughts. This was only the beginning. There were still many rounds to fight in this courtroom battle. But for the first time in years, Musk wasn't sure if he could win. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a war for his future, and it was getting more dangerous with each passing moment. As the judge prepared to call for a recess, Elon's mind raced. He had one chance to turn things around. But how could he outsmart a judge who was determined to hold him accountable? And, more importantly, was he even willing to face the consequences of his own actions? The court adjourned for the day, but the battle was far from over. Elon Musk, usually accustomed to controlling the narrative, now found himself in the unfamiliar position of having to navigate a much more complex and unpredictable terrain. Judge Margaret Blake was no pushover, and her unwavering stance was starting to gnaw at him. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, Elon felt a sense of urgency gnawing at his insides. He had to find a way to fight back. The night after the court session was long and restless. Musk sat in the penthouse of his private residence, staring out at the city below, his mind churning with thoughts. He had built empires out of nothing, turned failures into success, and revolutionized industries. But nothing in his life had ever prepared him for a trial like this. Elon was used to the constant attention, the constant scrutiny. But now, in the face of Judge Blake's fierce resolve, it felt different. He was no longer just a disruptor in the business world, he was now a figure under legal siege, his every move and word dissected in real time. The stakes had never been higher. As he paced around the room, his thoughts kept returning to one point: the truth. The truth that he had been fighting for years, the truth about innovation, the truth about humanity's future. He wasn't some villain to be cast aside in a courtroom drama. He was a man with a vision for a better world, for humanity's survival. And yet, it was becoming clear that if he didn't act fast, that vision could be lost forever. The next morning, Musk gathered his legal team for a strategy meeting. The faces around the table were grim. Richard Graham, his lead attorney, wasted no time getting to the point. "Judge Blake isn't going to be swayed by the usual tactics," Graham said, flipping through a thick stack of legal documents. "We've got to go on the offensive. But we need more than just facts, we need a narrative. Something that will resonate with the public. And we need it fast." Musk leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "I've been hearing that over and over again. Narrative. What exactly are you suggesting?" "We need to show Judge Blake, and the world, that this isn't just about mistakes, failures, or any of the charges they've thrown at us. It's about the bigger picture. The future. We can't let this trial become a witch hunt. You've changed the world, Elon. You've brought hope to millions with SpaceX, Tesla, and even the satellite project. It's time we remind everyone of that." Musk's eyes narrowed, a spark of realization flickering behind them. "You're right. I've let this become about the details, the mistakes, and not about the vision. But how do we fight back against this?" Richard smiled slightly. "By flipping the narrative. We need to focus on the bigger picture, the work you've done, the groundbreaking accomplishments, and how this trial threatens all of that. But we need a strategy that shows Judge Blake and the public that you aren't some out-of-touch billionaire. We need to show them that you are part of something bigger, a force that can't be ignored. We need to paint this as a story of perseverance, of triumph over adversity. And we need to take control of the courtroom." Musk stared at Richard, his mind racing. It was true. He had always been more than just a businessman. He was a symbol of human ambition, a man trying to push the boundaries of what was possible. If he could steer this narrative, if he could regain control, the tide could turn in his favor. But it wasn't going to be easy. Judge Blake wasn't the kind of person who could be swayed by flashy speeches or tech mogul charm. She was a woman of principle, and she would need more than just words to be convinced. "I'm ready to take this fight head-on," Musk said, his voice firm. "We're going to show the world who I really am, and why I've done what I've done. But we need to make the right moves. We're not just battling in this courtroom, we're battling for the future." The team sprang into action, strategizing on how to position Musk not as a defendant, but as a visionary, a man who had put everything on the line for something bigger than himself. They began preparing evidence, not just about the satellite project but about the breakthroughs that Musk had pioneered over the years, highlighting his commitment to solving some of the world's most pressing issues. They knew it wouldn't be enough to simply defend Musk, they had to turn the narrative on its head and show that the trial was bigger than the sum of its charges. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had reached a boiling point. News outlets were airing live coverage, discussing every detail of the case. Some painted Musk as a genius who had done what no one else could, while others took a more cynical approach, framing the trial as a long-awaited reckoning for the tech mogul. Social media exploded with debates over his character, his companies, and his impact on society. The public's perception of him was shifting in real time. Musk's team knew that the world was watching. Every move they made had to be calculated, deliberate. They couldn't afford any missteps. The next court session was pivotal. Elon had to face Judge Blake again, but this time, he was going to be different. Armed with a new strategy, a renewed sense of purpose, and a plan to take control, Musk walked into the courtroom with his head held high. He wasn't just fighting for his companies anymore, he was fighting for something bigger, the future of humanity, the legacy he was trying to build, and his place in history. Judge Blake was already seated at the bench when Musk entered the room. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, they exchanged an almost imperceptible stare. The tension was thick, but Musk wasn't backing down. He knew that this was it, the turning point. The trial resumed, and this time, Musk wasn't going to let the narrative slip away from him. He would fight for every inch. This wasn't just about defending himself, it was about shaping his destiny. As the trial continued, it became clear that the real battle was just beginning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators. The air was electric with anticipation as Elon Musk made his way to the stand once again. This wasn't just another day in the trial, it was the day he planned to turn the tide. After hours of strategizing with his team, Musk had decided that it was time to speak directly to the court and, more importantly, the public. Judge Margaret Blake sat at the bench, her piercing gaze never wavering. Her reputation as a no-nonsense judge had made her a formidable opponent, but Musk wasn't intimidated. He had been backed into a corner before, only to come out stronger. This time, however, it wasn't just about fighting for his companies, it was about fighting for his very soul. Musk stood tall, and for the first time during the trial, he allowed himself to fully absorb the weight of the moment. His mind was clear. This was his opportunity to show everyone, the judge, the jury, and the world, that he wasn't just a billionaire CEO trying to avoid the consequences of his actions. He was a man who had taken risks for the betterment of humanity, who had tried to change the world, even if it meant facing failure. As he took the stand, the room fell into a deep silence. Every eye was on him. His legal team had prepared a powerful statement, but Elon felt it was time to speak from the heart. He needed to make the people in that room understand who he truly was, beyond the headlines, beyond the failures, beyond the controversy. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Musk began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I stand here today not just as the CEO of Tesla or SpaceX, not just as someone who built a company from the ground up. I stand here as a human being, someone who has made mistakes and someone who is willing to own up to those mistakes." There was a shift in the room. Musk's words carried weight, and the tension seemed to ease slightly as the audience leaned in to listen. I know that many of you see me as someone who has everything, money, fame, power, but what you may not see is the burden that comes with that. The pressure to constantly innovate, to always be ahead of the curve, to take risks that no one else is willing to take. The truth is, I've failed more times than I can count. But each time I failed, I learned, and I got back up. Musk paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, and he knew this was the moment he needed to make them see the real Elon Musk. For those of you who don't know, I've spent years working on a vision, one that goes beyond profits or accolades. I've dedicated my life to creating a sustainable future, to exploring the stars, to connecting people across the globe. The satellite internet project that has led us to this courtroom wasn't just about building something for the sake of technology. It was about giving people in rural, underserved communities access to the world. It was about bringing hope where there was none. A soft murmur swept through the courtroom. This was the side of Musk that most people never saw, the side that wasn't focused on the headlines or the controversy, but on a higher calling. It was a side that was raw, vulnerable, and undeniably human. Musk's voice trembled slightly as he continued. I never intended to deceive anyone. There were setbacks, plenty of them, but we never stopped working toward the goal. We encountered issues with the satellites, yes. But we were also the first to admit those failures and try to fix them. We could have hidden them, buried them in a pile of corporate jargon, but we didn't. I owe that to the people who trusted me and to the millions who rely on the work we do. He looked directly at Judge Blake, his gaze unwavering. And I owe it to myself to be honest about where we are. I'm not asking for sympathy, Your Honor. I'm asking for understanding. I'm asking for the opportunity to finish what I started, to make it right, and to ensure that my mistakes don't define me. There was a palpable shift in the courtroom. For the first time, Musk's raw emotion reached the people in the room. The arrogance that had once defined his public persona was nowhere to be found. In its place was a man who had put everything on the line and was now asking for a chance to redeem himself, not just in the eyes of the court, but in the eyes of the world. Judge Blake remained silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of her decision. She had heard many defendants try to play on emotions, but something about Musk's words felt different. There was no arrogance, no deflection, just a man who was willing to face the consequences of his actions and fight for a cause he truly believed in. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Musk, she said, her voice calm but firm, I understand that you have worked tirelessly to create a vision for the future. But this court is not here to judge your ambition, your drive, or your intentions. We are here to determine whether you've misled investors, manipulated timelines, and failed to deliver on the promises you made. Your words today have given us some insight into your character. But that is not enough. We need the facts. Musk nodded. I understand, Your Honor. And I'm ready to provide them. As the session ended for the day, Musk walked back to his seat, his heart still pounding in his chest. He knew that he had just taken a huge risk, but in that moment, he also knew that it was the right one. For the first time in weeks, he felt as though he was no longer fighting alone. He had reminded the world, and himself, why he had started this journey in the first place. The next few days after Musk's emotional testimony were critical. The public reaction to his vulnerable speech was swift and overwhelming. Social media exploded with commentary, some were moved, some skeptical, and others still focused on the controversy surrounding his actions. The courtroom, however, was a different world. Every detail was analyzed with the precision of a surgeon, and in that sterile environment, Musk was still facing an uphill battle. Elon Musk had made a bold move on the stand, but he knew that a single emotional appeal wouldn't be enough to turn the tide in his favor. The fight wasn't over, it had just begun. Now, he had to deliver, on every front. In the days following his testimony, Musk's legal team worked tirelessly, sifting through mountains of data, emails, and correspondence. They needed to present a comprehensive case that would support Musk's claim that the failures were honest mistakes, ones that were being corrected, not hidden or ignored. They focused on the timeline of the satellite project, showing the initial enthusiasm, the progress, and ultimately, the bumps in the road. They even called in experts, engineers, project managers, and other figures from SpaceX and Tesla, to testify about the challenges they had faced and how those challenges were being tackled head-on. Musk knew that the next session would be crucial. The public perception was shifting in his favor, but he couldn't rely solely on his emotional appeal. This was a court of law, not a public relations campaign. The facts had to be on his side. The morning of the next court session, Musk stood in front of a mirror in his office, adjusting his tie, his face calm and determined. For the first time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. It wasn't just about his companies anymore, it was about proving that the work they were doing could change the world. Musk wasn't just fighting for himself, but for every employee who believed in the mission, for every person who relied on the technology, and for the future that he had been so passionate about. As he entered the courtroom, he felt the weight of the moment. It was clear that Judge Blake was not easily swayed by emotional outbursts. She had made her position known, and she wasn't about to back down from her mission of fairness and accountability. However, Musk had a plan. It was time to take the fight to a different level. Judge Blake's eyes locked onto him as he made his way to the stand. She was resolute, but Musk could sense a flicker of curiosity in her gaze, as if she was starting to see him as more than just a billionaire CEO. It wasn't enough to rely on the facts alone. The truth had to come alive through the witnesses, the data, and Musk himself. "Mr. Musk," Judge Blake said as she looked down from the bench. "We've heard your emotional appeal, but now we need to see the facts. What do you have to show us that proves this was an honest mistake and not a deliberate attempt to mislead your investors?" Musk nodded. "Your Honor, I understand. What I have to show you today is the story of progress, not perfection. We've made mistakes, yes. But we've also learned from them. We didn't hide anything. The truth was there, in plain sight, for anyone willing to look." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "And today, I'm bringing you the people who saw it all. The engineers, the team members, the ones who worked tirelessly alongside us to get this project off the ground. I'm bringing them to tell you that we've always acted with the highest integrity." The room fell silent as Musk's legal team began to call their first witness, a senior engineer from SpaceX who had been involved in the satellite project since its inception. The engineer, a woman named Dr. Emily Matthews, stepped up to the stand and was sworn in. She was composed and articulate, and as she spoke, it was clear that she had been deeply involved in the project, from the initial planning stages to the current state of the satellites. She explained the technical challenges they had faced, issues with the satellite launch systems, communication hiccups, and unforeseen environmental factors that had caused delays. But throughout it all, she emphasized that Musk and his team had remained transparent, never hiding the issues from investors or the public. "The challenges we faced were monumental," Dr. Matthews said, her voice unwavering. "But we addressed them head-on, and Elon was right there with us, constantly pushing us to do better. We were always forthright with the progress we were making, even when it wasn't as fast as we had hoped. This wasn't a case of mismanagement. It was a case of ambition exceeding expectations, and sometimes, reality just takes longer to catch up with vision." Musk watched from his seat, his heart swelling with pride. This was the narrative he needed, the story of a man who had set out to accomplish the impossible, and while there were setbacks, they had never given up. The public needed to hear this, and more importantly, Judge Blake needed to understand that the mistakes they had made were not born out of deception, but out of a genuine desire to change the world. The next witness was another member of the SpaceX team, a project manager who had overseen the satellite development and worked directly with Musk. His testimony echoed Dr. Matthews' statements, further solidifying the idea that the challenges had been genuine, not fabricated. Musk wasn't just a businessman trying to avoid blame, he was a leader who had taken responsibility for the setbacks and worked tirelessly to fix them. As the day continued, Musk's team presented more witnesses and evidence. It was clear that Musk wasn't just defending his companies, he was reshaping the narrative of the trial. He wasn't the villain who had misled investors and deceived the public. He was a visionary who had taken risks, encountered failure, and never lost sight of the greater goal. And then, just as the day was drawing to a close, Elon Musk stood once again. He addressed the courtroom directly, his voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor, I know that the road to innovation is not easy. I know that it is filled with setbacks, mistakes, and failures. But it is also filled with moments of triumph, moments where we push the boundaries of what's possible. We've made our mistakes, but we've also learned from them. And we will continue to learn, grow, and strive for something better." There was a quiet murmur in the room. Musk had done what many thought impossible, he had taken control of the narrative. No longer was he simply a tech mogul in the hot seat. He was a man on a mission, a man who had faced adversity and come out stronger. The tide was shifting, and Musk knew that the battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of hope. The truth was on his side, and he was ready to fight for it. Judge Blake sat quietly, taking in everything that had been presented. She had seen many cases in her time, but this one felt different. She had heard the stories of Musk's failures, but now she was hearing the story of his perseverance. And despite the legal complexities, one thing was clear: Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman, he was a man with a purpose. The courtroom had been buzzing with tension, but something had shifted. The witnesses had spoken, the defense had laid out their case, and Musk's team had done everything they could to build a foundation of credibility and transparency. The public had begun to rally around him, and even Judge Blake, though still stern, had shown signs of respect for the approach Musk had taken. But just as the trial seemed to be reaching its peak, a new complication emerged, one that no one had expected. It was late in the afternoon when it happened. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the courtroom. Judge Blake had just dismissed the jury for a break when Musk's attorney, John Harris, stood up, his face pale. His hand shook slightly as he placed a thick folder onto the table in front of him. "Your Honor, we have a situation," Harris said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. Musk's heart skipped a beat. He could see the unease in Harris's face, and it sent a chill down his spine. "What now?" Judge Blake's sharp eyes snapped to Harris, a stern frown pulling at the corners of her lips. "What situation, Mr. Harris?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Harris hesitated for a moment before speaking, the tension palpable. "We've just discovered some documents that were inadvertently left out of the evidence presented earlier. They were flagged in our internal review this morning." The room went silent, and Musk's stomach twisted in knots. The last thing he needed was more complications, especially after everything he had just worked so hard to establish. But what did these documents contain? Were they the smoking gun that his opponents had been waiting for? Judge Blake's eyes narrowed as she motioned for Harris to continue. "Please explain what these documents are and why they were not included in your earlier submissions." Harris took a deep breath and opened the folder. He began to speak, his voice steady despite the nervous energy emanating from him. "These documents are internal communications between Musk and several senior executives within SpaceX. They were emails from 2 years ago, discussing the early stages of the satellite project. The correspondence seems to indicate that there was knowledge of certain technical challenges much earlier than was publicly disclosed." Musk felt the blood drain from his face as Harris continued. "These emails suggest that there were serious concerns about the timeline of the project, and some of the risks involved may have been downplayed to investors. In essence, the documents could imply that the information presented to shareholders may have been less than transparent, which directly contradicts Mr. Musk's statements about full disclosure." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the weight of Harris's words sank in. Musk's legal team had fought to present him as someone who had nothing to hide, someone who had been upfront and honest with the world about the struggles of the satellite project. But if these documents were legitimate, they could undermine that entire narrative. Judge Blake's eyes were sharp, her gaze never leaving the folder as she processed the new information. "Mr. Harris, you will need to explain how these documents came to light. Why were they not submitted earlier, and why are we just now hearing about them?" Harris shifted uncomfortably, his expression strained. "The documents were overlooked during the initial evidence review, Your Honor. We were unaware of their existence until today, when they were flagged in a secondary audit by our internal team. We are not trying to conceal anything." Musk could feel his heart pounding in his chest. There had to be an explanation. But at that moment, he couldn't think of one. All he could do was wait and hope that the documents weren't as damning as they seemed. Judge Blake remained silent for a long moment, her gaze flicking between Harris and Musk. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and controlled. "We will need to verify these documents. I am giving you 1 hour to have them fully reviewed and authenticated. If they are legitimate, this court will have to reconsider the evidence in light of this new information." Musk stood frozen in place as the gravity of the situation settled in. An hour, just 1 hour, to prove that these documents were either fabricated or taken out of context. If they were genuine, the entire case could fall apart. Musk's entire defense strategy was built on the premise of transparency and honesty. If these emails painted him as a deceiver, all the progress he had made in the trial could be undone in a heartbeat. As the courtroom adjourned for the brief review, Musk's mind raced. He called for Harris immediately, his voice urgent. "John, are you sure about this? What exactly do those emails say?" Harris nodded, his brow furrowed in worry. "They're not great, Elon. The timing is off, and it looks like there were discussions about how to manage investor expectations, perhaps in a way that could be seen as misleading. But we don't know for certain yet whether they were actually meant to deceive or whether it was just poor communication during a chaotic time." "Poor communication?" Musk repeated, feeling a surge of frustration. "This is everything we've worked for. We can't afford to let them think that I manipulated anyone." "I know, Elon. But we'll need time to investigate the emails and see if there's any context we can present to explain them. If these documents are legitimate, we need to act fast." Musk nodded, but his mind was clouded with worry. This was not the turn he had expected the trial to take. After all the work he had done to prove his innocence and show his integrity, this new revelation threatened to shatter everything. As the hour passed, the tension in the air only grew heavier. Musk couldn't sit still. His thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. What if these documents were the smoking gun his critics had been waiting for? What if his entire life's work was about to crumble because of a series of emails that might make him look like a liar? Finally, the time was up. Musk and his legal team gathered in the courtroom once more, the weight of the moment heavier than ever. Harris stepped forward, holding the documents in his hand. His face was grim. "We've reviewed the emails, Your Honor," he said, his voice firm. "And after careful analysis, we believe they have been taken out of context. The communication surrounding the satellite project was never meant to mislead investors, and while the concerns were raised, they were always handled internally and not kept from anyone who needed to know." Judge Blake looked at Musk, her eyes cold and calculating. "Is that your final statement, Mr. Harris?" "It is, Your Honor," Harris replied, though there was a noticeable hesitation in his tone. The courtroom waited in suspense as Judge Blake processed the information. She finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning. I expect a full report on the legitimacy of these emails and their relevance to the case. If these emails are indeed as damaging as they appear, I will not hesitate to adjust the direction of this trial." Musk's heart sank. He had faced adversity before, but this was different. His future, his reputation, and everything he had worked for were now on the line in a way they had never been before. The following day arrived with an unsettling silence. The courtroom, usually filled with the sound of papers shuffling and whispers, was eerily quiet. Musk sat at the defendant's table, staring down at the stack of documents in front of him. His mind was racing, but his exterior remained calm. He had always been able to face challenges head-on, whether it was building rockets or running companies, but this felt different. This wasn't just a business challenge. This was about his reputation, his legacy, and everything he had worked for in his career. After the previous day's revelations, Musk's legal team had spent the entire night analyzing the newly uncovered emails. They had spent hours reviewing, cross-checking, and consulting with their experts, hoping to find a loophole, an explanation, or some kind of silver lining that could turn the tide in their favor. But as the courtroom reconvened, Musk knew that the situation was dire. Judge Blake entered, her black robes sweeping the floor as she made her way to the bench. She had been the picture of professionalism throughout the trial, never allowing her emotions to show, but Musk could sense a shift. She wasn't just dealing with another high-profile case, this one was about something more, something personal for her, too. A case that dealt with the very essence of integrity, transparency, and accountability. Mr. Harris, Judge Blake's voice rang out as she addressed Musk's attorney, you and your team had the opportunity to review the documents. What is your final assessment? The tension in the room was palpable. Musk could feel his breath quicken, his palms sweating. He had no idea what Harris was going to say, and frankly, he was too afraid to ask. Harris stood up, his face drawn and exhausted from the sleepless night. His voice was firm, but the usual confidence he exuded had been replaced with a hint of uncertainty. Your Honor, after an exhaustive review of the emails and the context surrounding them, we believe that the information was not intended to mislead investors, but rather, to express concerns that were never hidden. Yes, there were discussions about the project's risks, but they were always part of internal, candid conversations about what needed to be done. Musk exhaled slowly, hoping Harris could pull this off. They had worked so hard to show the world the truth, that the mistakes made had always been addressed. But the longer the documents were in the spotlight, the harder it became to avoid the question that lingered over everything: had he, in fact, downplayed critical information? Judge Blake didn't seem moved by Harris's explanation. Instead, she leaned forward, folding her hands in front of her. So, if these documents were not intended to mislead, why were they not included in the evidence from the start? And why were they only brought forward now? The question was cutting, and it felt like a direct blow to Musk's defense. He had hoped that the situation would pass quickly, but it seemed to be gaining momentum. He could see it in the way the room had shifted, the subtle shift in the body language of the jurors, the lingering gaze of the reporters, and the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. We have already explained, Your Honor, Harris responded, his voice a little firmer now. The documents were an oversight. Our review process missed them, and we've since rectified that mistake. We were not attempting to hide anything. Judge Blake's gaze did not waver. Mr. Harris, I want to be very clear about something. I have no tolerance for games in my courtroom. If these documents were intentionally withheld, the consequences will be severe. We will continue this trial under the assumption that all the evidence has been submitted, but be aware, any further revelations of withheld material will be met with consequences. The courtroom fell silent. Musk could feel the air in the room thicken, as if the very walls were closing in. This wasn't just about winning or losing the case anymore. This was about proving that he had acted with integrity, that his companies had acted with transparency. And yet, despite the gravity of the situation, Musk had a strange feeling of calm. He had lived through so many difficult moments in his life. The Tesla near bankruptcy, the struggles with SpaceX, the constant pressure of leading multiple companies, it was all leading to this point. It was easy to focus on the danger, on the risk of losing it all. But Elon Musk had learned over the years that what truly mattered was staying focused, staying committed to your vision, no matter how uncertain the future might look. As Judge Blake began to review the details of the emails, Musk's legal team huddled together, whispering among themselves. Musk caught a few words: damage control, context, and redemption. He knew they were doing everything they could to minimize the damage, but deep down, he also knew that this trial had exposed a level of vulnerability he had never anticipated. And then, something unexpected happened. Judge Blake raised her hand, signaling for silence in the courtroom. She paused for a moment, as if to let the tension build. Her expression remained neutral, but her words carried the force of someone who had seen it all. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice measured, "I've reviewed the documents in question, and I understand your defense. I also acknowledge the context you provided, along with the testimony from your witnesses. However, the fact remains that the emails are concerning, and their timing, particularly the language used, is something that needs to be addressed." Musk's stomach tightened. It wasn't over yet. The weight of her words hung in the air like a sword above his head. He had worked so hard to ensure transparency, and now, everything was at risk because of a few documents. She paused before continuing, her gaze lingering on Musk. "However, I have decided that, given the complexity of this case and the potential impact of these documents, I will give both sides more time to further investigate their origins and the relevance to the case. We will recess for 2 days to allow both teams to re-examine these materials in full and present any additional evidence or clarification you believe necessary." Musk could barely breathe. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. Judge Blake had given him a chance, an opportunity to explain, to correct the course before it was too late. "Court is recessed until Friday morning," Judge Blake concluded, banging her gavel sharply. As the room emptied, Musk remained seated, his head in his hands for a brief moment. He felt drained, but at the same time, a strange sense of relief washed over him. There was still hope. There was still time to fix this. "John," Musk called out to his attorney, who had been speaking with another member of the team. "What happens now?" Harris turned to him, his face filled with the exhaustion of the previous night's work. "Now, we push forward. We gather every piece of evidence we can. We need to find the context, explain the discrepancies, and make sure that these emails don't define who you are. We've been through worse, Elon. And we'll get through this." Musk nodded. "Then let's get to work." As he stood up and walked out of the courtroom, he knew the storm wasn't over. But there was something in the way Harris spoke, in the way his team rallied around him, that gave him the strength to keep fighting. The battle was far from won, but it wasn't lost yet either. The 2-day recess was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Musk's legal team had been given the precious time they needed to gather evidence, investigate the new documents, and strategize. On the other hand, every passing minute felt like an eternity. The public scrutiny of the trial had only intensified, and the pressure on Musk to clear his name had never been more palpable. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, but also with criticism, messages from investors, business partners, and even random individuals, all speculating about what the hidden documents might mean. Musk sat in his office late into the night, surrounded by piles of papers, emails, and legal documents. His mind was working overtime. This was not just a legal challenge, it was a fight for everything he had built, for the credibility of his companies, and for the values he held dear. The words, integrity, and transparency, had never felt more loaded. Could he really prove that the documents had been misunderstood? Could he turn this around? He glanced at the clock, almost 3 a.m. It had been a long night, but he refused to let exhaustion cloud his focus. He needed answers. John Harris, his lead attorney, had been working alongside a team of experts to carefully dissect the newly discovered emails. Musk had already seen the initial findings. The emails, sent between Musk and several senior executives at SpaceX, indicated a more cautious approach to the satellite project than had been publicly admitted. But the way the emails were written wasn't as damning as it initially seemed. They painted a picture of a team grappling with difficult choices, but they did not show a deliberate intent to mislead anyone. Musk sat up straighter, picking up the phone to call Harris. "John, where are we?" Musk asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Harris's voice crackled on the other end. "We've made some headway, Elon. We've found several key emails that show internal discussions about the challenges the satellite project faced. Yes, there were concerns raised, but they were always handled within the team. There's nothing that definitively shows any attempt to mislead investors." Musk felt a small flicker of hope. "So you're telling me these emails weren't a deliberate attempt to hide anything?" Harris exhaled. "No, they weren't. But we need to be careful here. The language used in some of them could be interpreted as an attempt to downplay risks, and that's what Judge Blake is going to focus on. We need to show that these conversations were part of standard internal strategy discussions, not anything malicious." Musk rubbed his eyes. This wasn't over yet, but at least there was a glimmer of hope. "All right, let's make sure we've got the context we need. Get the experts to dig deeper. I want everything on the table before we step back into that courtroom." With the call finished, Musk leaned back in his chair. His mind wandered back to the early days of SpaceX, how it all started with just a handful of people working late into the night, facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. This trial, despite the pressure, was nothing compared to the battles he had fought in those early days. If he had made it through the failures, the doubts, and the impossible odds then, he could get through this now. The next morning, the team reconvened at the courthouse. The air was thick with tension, but the sense of urgency was now palpable. The attorneys had all their evidence laid out, and the plan was clear. They would counter the claims in the emails by providing a broader context, demonstrating that Musk's actions had always been in line with the values of transparency and accountability. Judge Blake entered the courtroom, her presence commanding. She looked at the attorneys with a level of scrutiny that made everyone hold their breath. "Mr. Harris, I trust your team has had ample time to investigate the documents," she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Harris responded. "We've carefully reviewed them and have come to the conclusion that the documents, while concerning at first glance, were part of internal discussions aimed at mitigating risk and ensuring the project's success." Musk sat at the defendant's table, every fiber of his being focused on the unfolding exchange. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, and the weight of the situation was crushing. This was it, the moment that would determine the outcome of the trial, and possibly his legacy. Harris continued, "The emails reflect candid discussions, as often happens in the face of uncertainty. These emails do not suggest any intent to deceive, and in fact, many of the concerns mentioned were addressed and resolved at the time. The documents were not meant to be shared with investors in their raw form, they were internal assessments to ensure that we were being proactive in managing risk." Judge Blake listened attentively, but Musk could tell she wasn't yet convinced. She wasn't an easy judge to sway. "And these concerns," she interjected, "were not presented to investors or the public?" Harris nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor. At the time, the information was still evolving, and we believed that the risks were manageable. However, those internal discussions never reached a point where the public was misled. The project continued to move forward transparently, with the necessary disclosures made at the appropriate times." Musk could feel his throat tighten. He had to admit, the fact that these emails were being scrutinized so heavily still unsettled him. But he had to trust his team. They were giving everything they had to clear his name. Judge Blake leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers as she absorbed the information. The courtroom waited, breathless. Finally, she spoke again. "I have reviewed the materials presented, and I am not convinced that there is enough evidence to suggest intentional deception. However, there remains the issue of transparency. I need to know that Mr. Musk's companies are committed to full transparency moving forward. If there is any doubt that these actions were anything less than forthright, I will not hesitate to issue a verdict against you." Musk's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a ruling, it was a warning. I understand, Your Honor, Musk said, standing up from his seat for the first time that day. His voice was steady, but inside, his emotions were running wild. Transparency has always been my guiding principle. SpaceX, Tesla, everything I've built, every decision, every step we've taken, has been in the spirit of transparency. The emails may have been poorly worded at times, but they do not reflect our intention to deceive. We will continue to act with the highest standards of integrity moving forward. The room was still, the air thick with anticipation. Musk could feel his heart racing in his chest. He had just made his stand, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Judge Blake studied him carefully for a moment before nodding. Very well. I will deliberate on this matter. Court is adjourned until tomorrow. He had made his case. He had shown who he was. But now, it was in the hands of the court. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric as the second day of deliberation began. The gavel had struck, and the courtroom was in chaos, but not in the way it had been the day before. There were no more urgent discussions, no more passionate exchanges between the defense and the prosecution. Now, the wait was all that remained, the wait for Judge Blake to make her decision. Elon Musk sat at the defendant's table, his eyes fixed on the empty chair where his attorney, John Harris, had just been seated moments earlier. The room buzzed with hushed conversations and the shuffle of papers. The air was thick with tension as reporters, witnesses, and even the gallery of spectators exchanged their own theories, wondering whether Musk would walk out of that courtroom cleared of all charges, or if this trial would mark the beginning of the end for his empire. Musk was no stranger to high stakes. Over the years, he had faced countless challenges, whether it was SpaceX's near bankruptcy, Tesla's financial troubles, or the constant scrutiny over his unconventional approach to business. But this trial? This was different. This wasn't about rockets or electric cars. This wasn't even about innovation anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal. It was about his integrity, his reputation, and his character. Musk had made his stand in the courtroom. He had declared his commitment to transparency, to honesty, and to doing right by his companies and the people who depended on them. He had put everything on the line. Now, it was out of his hands. Harris finally returned to the table, his face grim. Musk knew that his attorney had been busy consulting with other members of the team, preparing to respond if Judge Blake required any further clarifications. But there was no escaping the fact that the ball was now firmly in the judge's court. "She's still deliberating," Harris said quietly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. Musk nodded, his jaw clenched. He had long ago learned to keep his emotions in check, but that didn't make this situation any easier. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. The longer Judge Blake took, the more nervous the entire team became. This was it, the moment of truth. He had always known that there would be tough battles along the way, but somehow, this one felt like the hardest. "I just want this over with," Musk muttered, more to himself than to Harris. "I know," Harris replied, his voice sympathetic. "But let's not forget, if there was ever a time we showed our integrity, it was in that courtroom yesterday. We presented our case. We didn't hide behind any excuses. All we can do now is wait for the judge to make her decision." Musk let out a deep breath, leaning back in his chair and closing his eyes for a moment. He needed to calm his mind. This was not the first time his future had been uncertain, there had been many close calls before, and yet, he had always found a way to rise above them. This would be no different. It couldn't be. The courtroom doors opened suddenly, and everyone fell silent. Judge Blake entered, her presence commanding as always. Her robe rustled as she made her way to the bench. Musk's heart skipped a beat, and he straightened up in his chair, instinctively sitting taller. This was it, the final moment. Judge Blake took her seat and glanced around the courtroom. Her gaze seemed to linger on Musk for a moment before she addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and composed, I have carefully reviewed all of the materials presented in this case, including the newly uncovered documents and the subsequent explanations offered by Mr. Musk's defense. This has been a difficult case, one that required careful consideration. The charges against Mr. Musk are serious, and they involve issues of integrity and transparency that cannot be taken lightly. Musk's stomach tightened. He was holding his breath, not daring to look away. This was the pivotal moment. Her words could either absolve him or condemn him. The central issue in this case, Judge Blake continued, is whether the actions taken by Mr. Musk and his companies were intentional acts of deception, or whether they were part of a broader, internal dialogue meant to address the inherent risks of the satellite project. The evidence presented by the defense suggests that while certain communications may have been worded poorly, there is no conclusive evidence to show that Mr. Musk intentionally misled investors or the public. Musk allowed himself a moment of cautious hope. The judge was leaning in his favor, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. There are, however, concerns regarding transparency, Judge Blake went on. While I accept that the language in the emails may have been more reflective of internal concerns, there was a failure to provide a clearer, more complete picture of those risks to investors. The transparency that should have been present was, in some instances, lacking. Musk's throat went dry. He had known this was a possibility, but hearing it out loud hit harder than he expected. His defense had hinged on proving that no deception had taken place, but now the judge was emphasizing a failure in transparency. I believe that Mr. Musk has shown a genuine commitment to transparency moving forward, Judge Blake said, her voice now softer, and I believe that the actions taken in this trial were in good faith. Nevertheless, the lack of clarity in communication has led to a significant loss of confidence. It is not enough to simply act with integrity, one must also demonstrate that integrity through clear, forthright communication. That is the lesson here. Musk's heart pounded in his chest. Was she about to deliver the verdict? After a long pause, Judge Blake spoke again, her voice firm. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mr. Musk. While there were mistakes made in the handling of internal communications, there is insufficient evidence to support the claim that these actions were intentionally deceptive. I find that the charges against Mr. Musk should be dismissed, and that he and his companies must take the necessary steps to improve transparency in the future. A wave of relief washed over Musk as the weight that had been hanging over him for weeks finally lifted. He exhaled sharply, feeling as if he had just surfaced from underwater. His legal team exchanged glances, and though they remained composed, it was clear that the pressure had broken. But Judge Blake wasn't finished. She still had one final point to make. However, she said, her voice unwavering, this trial has exposed weaknesses in the way Mr. Musk's companies handle sensitive communications, and I am ordering a full audit of their practices moving forward. This audit will ensure that every step is taken to protect the interests of investors, consumers, and the public at large. The words hung in the air, but they were a far cry from the verdict Musk had feared. With the gavel's final strike, Judge Blake concluded, "Court is adjourned." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom emptied quickly, the audience and reporters scattering as the buzz of conversation filled the air. Elon Musk stood, momentarily stunned by the judge's ruling, though the weight of the decision still hadn't fully sunk in. His legal team erupted in quiet celebration, their whispers filled with relief, but Musk remained motionless. He couldn't help but replay the judge's words in his mind. While he had been cleared of intentional wrongdoing, the ruling left a shadow of doubt lingering over the transparency of his companies. Musk glanced over at John Harris, his lead attorney. Harris met his gaze and offered a small, congratulatory nod, but Musk knew the fight wasn't over. "Let's head out, Elon," Harris said, his tone both reassuring and practical. Musk nodded but remained standing for a moment, scanning the empty courtroom. He felt a pang in his chest, a familiar sense of both victory and exhaustion, a paradox that had become all too common in his life. The ruling didn't feel like a win yet. Not when there was so much work ahead. The courtroom door swung open, and Musk's team quickly packed up. Outside, the press had already gathered in droves, cameras flashing as reporters bombarded the legal team with questions. Musk stepped forward, flanked by his attorneys, walking towards the exit. "Mr. Musk, what's next for Tesla and SpaceX?" a reporter shouted. Musk stopped, his gaze unwavering. He had prepared himself for the questions that were sure to come. He had already rehearsed his answers in his head, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself responding with an uncharacteristic calmness. "We'll continue to do what we've always done," Musk said firmly. "Innovate. Take risks. And most importantly, lead with transparency and accountability. We've learned valuable lessons from this experience, and will grow stronger because of it." Another reporter shouted, "Are you worried about the audit? Will it impact SpaceX's plans for the future?" Musk looked over at the sea of journalists. He didn't flinch. "The audit is a step in the right direction. Transparency isn't just a word, it's a commitment we're making to our investors, our employees, and our customers. It'll be challenging, but it's necessary for us to move forward." As he spoke, Musk's thoughts flickered back to the trial. His mind raced through the arguments, the evidence, the court's intense scrutiny. There was something about the trial that felt unfinished. True, the charges had been dismissed, but the audit would hold his companies to an even higher standard. Musk wasn't worried about what the audit would find, he was more concerned about rebuilding the trust that had been fractured, especially with the public. He stepped into the back of a black SUV, the door closing behind him. The weight of the day felt heavy, pressing in from all sides, but in the stillness of the car, Musk allowed himself a moment to reflect. He had been through countless battles in his life, but this one had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the car drove through the streets of downtown, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX and one of his closest allies. "Congrats on the win, Elon. But we have work to do. We can't let this audit derail us." He smiled at her words. Gwynne was right, work had to continue. He couldn't afford to let the public doubt his leadership. The world was watching. The next few weeks were a blur. The media's attention didn't waver, but now, instead of focusing on the trial's dramatic twists and turns, they were paying close attention to Musk's every move, his tweets, his business decisions. It was a different kind of pressure, the kind that weighed heavily on a person's reputation. Musk immediately began making changes at both SpaceX and Tesla. He knew the ruling was a setback in some ways, but it also served as a wake-up call. He had always prided himself on pushing the limits of innovation, but now, it was time to push the limits of transparency. At SpaceX, he instituted a new internal policy aimed at ensuring all communications, particularly those with investors, would be crystal clear. He enlisted a team of external auditors to review every communication channel, from emails to quarterly reports, and to provide feedback on how to improve. Musk didn't want any ambiguity in the way the company communicated its risks, its successes, or its failures. Every stakeholder, whether it was an investor, a customer, or the public, deserved to know what was happening, especially when things were difficult. At Tesla, the changes were similarly focused on transparency, but Musk also took the opportunity to streamline processes that had previously been far too complex. The company's quarterly earnings reports, often the subject of intense scrutiny, were now written with the kind of clarity that Musk knew would help rebuild confidence. Every number was carefully explained, every challenge clearly stated. It wasn't about hiding the rough patches, it was about being upfront about them. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks along the way, challenges in implementing new processes, resistance from some employees who were used to the old ways. But Musk was used to challenges. They were part of the journey, part of the road to achieving something greater. But even as Musk threw himself into the work of rebuilding his companies, there was still something eating at him. He kept thinking about Judge Blake's final words, you must demonstrate that integrity through clear, forthright communication. It was a challenge Musk wasn't willing to back down from. A few months after the ruling, he decided to address the matter directly in a public forum, an open letter to his employees, investors, and the public. He didn't want to hide behind press releases or corporate jargon. He wanted to be transparent about the lessons learned from the trial. The letter was simple but powerful. To our investors, employees, and customers, thank you for your continued support during what has been an incredibly challenging period. I've learned that leadership isn't just about innovation or pushing the boundaries of what's possible. It's about ensuring that every decision made, every communication shared, and every step taken is done with integrity and transparency. We have made mistakes, and we are committed to ensuring that we do better in the future. SpaceX and Tesla are more than companies, they are communities built on trust, and that trust will always be our priority. We will continue to work harder, push further, and, most importantly, communicate with honesty and transparency every step of the way. The letter was met with an overwhelmingly positive response. Musk had done what few leaders would dare, he admitted to his mistakes publicly and took responsibility. It wasn't just a message for his employees, it was a message for the world. And for the first time in a long time, Musk felt something he hadn't in a while, a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it with renewed clarity and determination. The months following the trial were marked by significant changes for Elon Musk. Not just within his companies, but also in his personal life. The public's perception of him had shifted. Once seen as a bold, sometimes controversial figure, Musk was now emerging as someone more reflective, a leader committed to transformation. Yet, despite the strides he was making, there were still whispers, doubts that lingered just beneath the surface of his every public appearance. It was early morning when Musk received a call that would set the course of his life in a direction he hadn't anticipated. He had just finished a meeting with SpaceX's new transparency team, experts he'd brought in to ensure that his companies wouldn't slip back into old habits. As always, the tension was palpable. Every move was under a microscope. There had been successes, but there were still so many hurdles ahead. His mind was heavy with the burden of expectations. The phone buzzed on his desk. The name on the screen made him pause. Judge Margaret Blake. It was a name Musk never thought he'd see again, especially not this soon after the trial. They had shared the courtroom, but their paths had never crossed outside of those walls. Still, there was something oddly familiar about her. Her clear, unyielding vision of justice had stayed with him, even long after the gavel fell. He answered the call. Mr. Musk, Judge Blake's voice was steady, but there was a warmth to it that caught him off guard. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Musk chuckled, though he was genuinely surprised. Not at all, Judge. What's on your mind? Musk leaned back in his chair. I know that, he replied, his tone thoughtful. I'm doing everything I can to make it right. And you will, Judge Blake agreed. But you can't do it alone. The world needs to see that you're not just talking about change. You need allies, people who can speak to your character, your integrity. It's not just about the work you do. It's about the people you surround yourself with. Musk was quiet for a moment. The idea of relying on others wasn't something he had ever embraced easily. He had always believed in the power of his own vision, his ability to single-handedly change industries, rewrite the future. But he understood what Blake was saying. The trial had shown him that even the most visionary leader needed a foundation of trust. He couldn't do it alone. Who do you have in mind? Musk asked cautiously. Judge Blake's response was swift. I've been in touch with someone I think could help you. Someone who knows you well enough to speak to your character, someone who can be a bridge between you and the public. She's been watching your work for years, and she believes in the potential of what you're doing. Musk's curiosity piqued. Who? Gwynne Shotwell, Blake said. The name struck Musk like a bolt of lightning. Gwynne Shotwell had been a pivotal part of SpaceX's success, his right hand, his partner in building a company that had changed the space industry. But beyond that, Gwynne was the rock-solid presence at the core of SpaceX's operations. She was everything he wasn't: pragmatic, composed, and often the calming force when his ideas veered into the realm of the impossible. Musk felt a flicker of doubt. Gwynne. She's already on my team, Judge. What makes you think she can be an ally in this new phase? I'm not talking about her role in your companies, Elon, Blake replied, her voice soft but insistent. I'm talking about her ability to help you reconnect with the public. To help you rebuild not just your companies but the trust of the people who have been watching this whole ordeal unfold. Musk thought about it. He knew Gwynne. He respected her more than anyone else in his circle. If there was anyone who could balance his visionary ambition with the kind of grounded leadership needed in this moment, it was Gwynne. He sighed, feeling the weight of the decision. Okay. I'll reach out to her. But how exactly do we approach this? Blake was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a finality that Musk found reassuring. Gwynne is already prepared. She's been thinking about this for a while. You just need to trust her, Elon. You'll find that, together, you can create something that not only salvages your reputation but pushes your companies to new heights. Musk leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The path ahead was uncertain, but Judge Blake's words resonated with him. This wasn't just about fixing a few mistakes. It was about reshaping his entire approach, ensuring that the foundation of trust he was building would stand firm for years to come. I'll do it, Musk said finally, his voice firm. I'll get in touch with Gwynne. Let's make it happen. The call ended, leaving Musk in deep thought. Rebuilding his reputation wasn't just about fixing the damage. It was about growth, collaboration, and vulnerability, qualities that, for a long time, he had resisted in favor of relentless self-reliance. His phone buzzed again, interrupting his reverie. This time, it was a message from Gwynne Shotwell herself. Elon, I just got off the phone with Judge Blake. She says you'll be calling. Let's talk soon. We have work to do. Musk smiled to himself, a sense of calm settling over him. If anyone could help him take this next step, it was Gwynne. The journey was far from over. But now, for the first time in a long while, Musk felt like he was on the right track. The day after his call with Judge Blake, Elon Musk sat in his office, staring out the window at the sprawling Tesla factory in the distance. The weight of the past few months, the trial, the public backlash, and the looming audit, felt heavier than ever. The constant pressure to prove himself, to maintain his position as a visionary leader, was beginning to take its toll. Yet, there was a flicker of something else in his gut: hope. Hope that the call with Gwynne Shotwell would spark a new direction, a path forward where he could regain the public's trust, not through grand gestures or flashy displays, but through consistent, transparent action. The groundwork had already begun, but with Gwynne's help, it could accelerate into something far more powerful. Elon reached for his phone and dialed Gwynne's number. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice calm and composed as always. Hey, Elon, she said. I take it you're ready to talk. Gwynne paused for a moment, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. I've been thinking a lot about this. The public has seen the flashy innovations, the launches, and the vision. What they haven't seen, though, is the behind-the-scenes work, the accountability, the real commitment to being open about where we're at. I think that's where we can really set ourselves apart. Elon's thoughts started to align with hers. He'd always been about pushing the envelope with new technologies and ambitious projects, but perhaps he had underestimated how much the world needed to see the process, the honesty, the struggles, the human side of his empire. Okay, so how do we move forward? Elon asked, eager to get into specifics. What's the first step? Gwynne's voice was decisive, the clarity of her plan already forming in her mind. The first thing we need to do is get ahead of the story. We need to show people that we are actively working on improving, not just responding after the fact. This isn't just about putting out fires, it's about telling a bigger story. A story of resilience, innovation, and learning. Elon was quiet for a moment, letting the idea settle. You're right. It's about reframing the narrative. We'll need a public-facing campaign, not just for investors, but for customers and employees too. We've got to show them that we're not just the companies that create the next big thing, but the companies that are always working to be better, to grow. And that means we'll need full transparency, Gwynn continued. We can't just release occasional statements. It has to be a consistent, visible effort. Regular updates. Behind-the-scenes footage of our teams working, dealing with setbacks, making tough decisions. It's the human side of innovation that people are missing. Elon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Right. They're all looking at the product. They're not seeing the work behind it. What if we show them? Show the world how difficult it really is to innovate at this scale. What it takes to get things off the ground. That's exactly what I'm saying, Gwynn agreed. People don't always appreciate the complexity behind everything we do, so they jump to conclusions when something goes wrong. It's not about making excuses, it's about letting them in on the full process, the ups and the downs. That's how we rebuild trust. Elon felt a surge of energy. This was the direction he needed. It wasn't just about winning back favor through business as usual. It was about showing vulnerability, something he had been reluctant to do. For all his accomplishments, he had rarely let the world see the cracks. But now, it seemed like that might be the key to reconnecting with the people he had once inspired. Alright, let's move forward with that. Let's start laying out a campaign, a real, in-depth look at what we're doing day in and day out. But we need to make sure the world sees it. Not just corporate partners, but everyone, employees, investors, customers. We can't afford to leave anyone in the dark anymore. Gwynn's voice softened, but there was a clear sense of purpose behind her words. We're going to need a lot of buy-in from the teams at both Tesla and SpaceX. People have to be willing to let down their guard and open up. Not everyone's going to be on board with this level of transparency. Are you ready for that? Elon hesitated for a moment. He had always been the leader, the one who made the decisions, but this was different. This wasn't just about the vision anymore, it was about trust. And that required not only him but also his employees to open up in ways they hadn't before. I'm ready, he said, the weight of the responsibility settling firmly on his shoulders. This isn't just about proving the doubters wrong. It's about proving to ourselves that we can do better. That we can do what's right. Good, Gwynn said, her voice firm. I'll start working on the strategy for the transparency campaign. We'll need to get the message right, keep it clear, honest, and focused on the future. No more hiding behind the curtain. The world deserves to know what's really going on. The conversation ended with a sense of clarity that Elon hadn't felt in months. It was going to be a challenge, he knew that. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had the right ally by his side. Together, they would rebuild what had been fractured. Together, they would change the story. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Gwynn and Elon met daily, crafting the transparency campaign that would serve as the cornerstone of their comeback. The campaign was carefully designed to show not just the success of SpaceX and Tesla, but also the real, raw process behind it. They knew it wouldn't be easy. They would have to show their vulnerabilities, admit their shortcomings, and be completely open about what wasn't working. But they were committed. The first phase of the campaign would be a series of video diaries, behind-the-scenes footage that showcased the daily operations at Tesla and SpaceX. They would feature interviews with engineers, designers, and employees at all levels of the companies. The idea was to show that the success of these companies wasn't just about Elon Musk's genius, it was about the collaborative effort of thousands of people working toward a common goal. The second phase would focus on regular updates. Musk and Gwynn knew that people needed to see the progress in real time. They decided to hold quarterly live-streamed sessions where they would address challenges openly, answer tough questions, and give updates on the progress they were making. For the first time, Elon felt like he wasn't just acting on his own. He had a plan, a direction, and, most importantly, a partner who could help him implement it. The path ahead was clear, but it was going to take time. Rebuilding trust couldn't be done in a day. But with Gwynn by his side, Elon was ready to take on the challenge. Together, they would show the world that transparency was more than a buzzword. It was a new way forward. The announcement was made. After weeks of intense preparation and meticulous planning, the world would finally get a glimpse into the inner workings of SpaceX and Tesla. Elon Musk and Gwynne Shotwell stood at the helm of this groundbreaking campaign, determined to show the world the true nature of their companies. The transparency campaign wasn't just about addressing past mistakes, it was about shifting the narrative completely, opening the doors to what had always been behind closed walls. It was a Tuesday morning when the first video was released. The video was simple but powerful. It opened with a close-up of Musk, standing in the SpaceX headquarters. His usual swagger was replaced with a more thoughtful expression as he addressed the camera. "Hi, I'm Elon Musk," he began, his tone calm but direct. "Today, I'm here to show you something different. I'm here to show you what's really going on behind the scenes of the companies we've built. It's not just about the next big idea or the flashy tech. It's about the hard work, the struggles, and yes, the mistakes we've made along the way." The screen then cut to a series of behind-the-scenes clips from both Tesla and SpaceX. There were engineers working late into the night, technicians troubleshooting problems, and teams in brainstorming sessions, deeply invested in solving the issues that arose daily. The footage was raw, unfiltered, and human. It wasn't polished or scripted. It was the heartbeat of both companies, showing the world that success wasn't as glamorous as it often seemed. Elon's voice returned over the footage. "We've had our challenges. We've made mistakes. But we've learned. And we want to show you how we're fixing them." The video ended with a shot of Elon and Gwynn walking through a Tesla production line, discussing a new battery design. The casual nature of their conversation contrasted with the high-stakes world they inhabited. The message was clear: this was a team effort, and Elon wasn't the sole face of it. When the video went live, it immediately went viral. Social media erupted, and reactions were mixed. There was a surge of support from loyal fans, those who had always believed in Musk's vision. They appreciated the honesty, the vulnerability. But there was also skepticism. Critics, ever eager to point out flaws, began to question the sincerity of the move. Was this just a PR stunt to cover up past mistakes, or was it the beginning of a real transformation? Elon was prepared for both. The team knew that regaining trust wouldn't be a quick fix. It would take time. They had to show not just one video, but a steady stream of action. They couldn't afford to appear insincere or opportunistic. Within days of the first video's release, Musk and Gwynn held their first live-streamed quarterly update. The event was broadcast from Tesla's Gigafactory, with a panel of engineers, designers, and employees ready to field questions. It was live and unfiltered, something that had never been done before. The event was as much about transparency as it was about accountability. Musk opened the session with a few words: "We're here today to answer your questions. No filters, no talking points, just the truth. You've asked us for transparency, and now it's time we show you what that really means. We're here to take responsibility and share what we've learned." The first few questions came from journalists and investors, who were eager to hear about the specifics of Tesla's recent supply chain delays and SpaceX's progress on Mars colonization. But then came a question that made Elon pause. A viewer named Sarah, a Tesla owner, asked, "I've been following Tesla for years, and I've always supported you, Elon. But after the controversies, I'm not sure where we stand anymore. How do we know that this transparency campaign is more than just words?" What are you doing to ensure these issues don't happen again? Elon took a deep breath before responding. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment when he could no longer hide behind ambition or quick fixes. It had to be real. We've learned a lot from our mistakes, he said, his voice steady. And we're committed to making the necessary changes to ensure they don't happen again. This campaign is just the beginning. We'll be doing regular updates like this to keep you informed. We're not just talking about the future, we're showing you how we're building it, step by step. Our teams are working hard every single day to improve, and we're going to let you see that firsthand. It wasn't the perfect answer, nothing would ever be, but it was honest. And that was what mattered. As the live stream continued, more and more viewers joined the conversation. Some were still doubtful, but many others expressed appreciation for the openness. There was no more avoiding the hard questions. Musk and Gwynne were making themselves vulnerable, showing the world their process in a way they never had before. The feedback over the next few days was a mix of cautious optimism and continued skepticism. There was no magic bullet for restoring Musk's reputation. It wasn't just about the campaign, it was about the consistent effort that would follow. But something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, people felt like they were being let in, not just sold to. Gwynne, who had been watching the live stream with Elon, turned to him afterward. You did well today. It's not easy, but you're doing what needs to be done. Elon nodded, his mind already racing to the next steps. I know it's just the beginning. We'll have to keep pushing, keep showing up. It's the only way. But for now, the transparency campaign was underway. Elon Musk and Gwynne Shotwell had taken the first step on a path that would lead them to rebuild what had been broken. It would take time, effort, and relentless commitment, but they were ready. The world was watching, and they weren't going to disappoint. The transparency campaign was only one part of Elon Musk's larger mission to regain control of the narrative. The other part, the trial, loomed over him like a dark cloud, threatening to undo all the progress he had made. It had been weeks since the public release of the transparency videos, and while they had gained some traction, the trial was a constant distraction. The high-profile lawsuit filed against Musk for misleading investors regarding Tesla's financial situation had been scheduled to begin in just a few days. This wasn't just any lawsuit. The public was watching. The media had followed every twist and turn of the case, making it a matter of national, and even global, interest. Musk was not just fighting for his companies, he was fighting for his reputation, his future. The courtroom battle would determine whether he could emerge unscathed or if this legal battle would mark the end of his reign. Judge Gwynne Blake would be presiding over the case. A sharp and meticulous judge, she had a reputation for being no-nonsense. Her decisions were often final, and her courtroom was a place where only the facts mattered. No one had expected her to take an interest in Musk's case, but as the trial date drew closer, it became clear that she had every intention of holding him accountable, not just for the lawsuit, but for his entire public persona. Elon knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. He had been used to facing adversity in his career, but this was different. There was no room for error. Every word he said, every action he took, would be scrutinized. The day of the trial arrived. Elon sat at the defendant's table, his mind swirling with strategy. Beside him sat his legal team, a group of seasoned professionals who had dealt with countless high-profile cases, but none quite like this one. Across the courtroom, Judge Blake sat at her bench, her face a mask of impartiality. The buzz in the room was palpable, everyone knew this was going to be a spectacle. Judge Blake called the court to order, and the proceedings began. The prosecution wasted no time, immediately launching into their argument that Musk had misled investors by making overly optimistic claims about Tesla's financial outlook, claims that led to inflated stock prices and ultimately, financial losses for investors. Elon's legal team countered, arguing that his comments had been made in good faith, based on the information available at the time. They argued that Musk's words were his personal opinion and that he had never intended to mislead anyone. The trial quickly became a back and forth, with both sides presenting evidence and calling witnesses to testify. But what no one expected was Judge Blake's piercing questions. She didn't just listen to the arguments, she probed them, dissecting every detail with surgical precision. When Elon's legal team claimed that Musk's statements had been taken out of context, Judge Blake turned to them and asked, "But isn't it true that your client has a history of making bold claims that are sometimes far from reality?" The room fell silent. Elon's heart raced as he realized the direction the judge was taking. She wasn't interested in the usual corporate defense. She was going after the heart of the matter. Was Musk a visionary who sometimes pushed the boundaries of reality, or was he someone who had misled the public for his own gain? Musk took a deep breath and glanced at Gwynne Shotwell, who was sitting in the audience. She gave him a reassuring nod. He knew that whatever happened, he had to be honest. This wasn't the time for deflection or clever spin, it was time for the truth. When it was his turn to take the stand, Elon rose from his seat and walked toward the witness box. He had faced tough interviews and challenging questions before, but this felt different. This was a courtroom, and the stakes were higher than ever. Judge Blake's eyes were fixed on him as he took the oath. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice firm but not unkind. "You've built an empire based on innovation, but your words have often been controversial. Do you believe that your statements about Tesla's future were always accurate?" Elon's mind raced, but he remained calm. He had rehearsed for this moment, but nothing could prepare him for the weight of the question. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Your Honor," he began, "I've always believed in the potential of Tesla, and I've always tried to communicate that vision. Some of the things I've said have been ambitious. But I never intended to mislead anyone. I'm passionate about this company and its mission. I truly believe we are on the verge of changing the world." Judge Blake studied him for a moment before asking, "But doesn't that passion sometimes cloud your judgment? Doesn't it lead you to make statements that are not grounded in reality?" Elon hesitated. There was no easy answer to that. He had always been driven by big ideas, by the belief that he could revolutionize industries. But he also knew that not everyone saw his vision the way he did. "I can admit that sometimes I've been too optimistic," he said slowly. "But I've never lied. I've always believed that the future is within our reach, and I've pushed Tesla to be better, faster, and more efficient. That's what I've always strived for." Judge Blake nodded, but her expression remained unchanged. "We'll see, Mr. Musk. We'll see." The trial continued, with both sides presenting their cases. Musk's legal team worked tirelessly to prove that the stock price fluctuations were not the result of any intentional wrongdoing on Musk's part. They also highlighted Tesla's undeniable achievements, pointing out that the company had brought electric vehicles into the mainstream, and SpaceX had made historic advancements in space travel. But every time Musk's team seemed to gain ground, Judge Blake would cut through the arguments with her pointed questions. She wasn't letting anyone off the hook easily, not even Musk. She was relentless, and it was clear she had no interest in simply taking sides. She wanted the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. As the day wore on, Musk found himself growing more and more anxious. He had always been able to convince people with his vision, but this wasn't about inspiring a crowd, it was about proving, under oath, that he hadn't crossed a line. The pressure was suffocating. When the day's proceedings finally ended, Musk returned to his seat, feeling the weight of the trial pressing down on him. The next day would be even more intense. He knew that Judge Blake wasn't going to let him off the hook easily. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't hiding from the truth. He was confronting it head-on. And that, he realized, was the first step toward redemption. The second day of the trial felt even heavier than the first. Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from challenges, but standing in that courtroom, under the scrutinizing gaze of Judge Gwynne Blake, he found himself questioning the cost of his ambitions. The courtroom had become more than just a place to fight for his reputation, it was now a battleground where his future was at stake. Elon sat in silence, listening to his legal team strategize. They had been working overtime, preparing to counter every accusation with precision. But even with their relentless efforts, the one thing no one could control was Judge Blake's sharp mind. She had already proven that she wasn't easily swayed by flashy arguments or eloquent speeches. She wanted the truth, plain and simple, and she wasn't afraid to press hard for it. But then, just as things were starting to feel like they couldn't get worse, something unexpected happened. An ally appeared. It wasn't someone from his legal team. It wasn't even someone from his companies. No, this was someone who had been watching from the sidelines, someone who had a unique perspective on the case. Gwynne Shotwell. Elon had always relied on Gwynne's steady hand and pragmatic approach to running SpaceX. While Elon was the dreamer and visionary, Gwynne was the one who made sure those dreams were grounded in reality. She had been one of the few people who had consistently believed in him, even when the world doubted him. But in the courtroom, she was just another observer, until now. As the court session resumed after lunch, Judge Blake asked a critical question, one that had been hanging over Elon like a sword of Damocles. "Mr. Musk," she began, "in light of your repeated optimistic statements, do you not believe that these could have misled your investors, especially considering your position of power?" Elon's heart raced. He had answered similar questions before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the money or the stock price, it was about how his words had impacted people's lives. The responsibility weighed on him like a heavy anchor. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, something unexpected happened. Gwynne Shotwell stood up in the audience, walking briskly toward the front of the courtroom. There was a murmur of surprise from the spectators as she made her way to the witness stand, her expression calm but determined. Judge Blake looked up, clearly startled by the interruption. "Your Honor," Gwynne said, her voice steady but assertive. "I'd like to offer a different perspective. If I may." Judge Blake, though known for her no-nonsense approach, nodded, granting her the floor. Elon couldn't believe his eyes. Gwynne had never done something like this before, she was always behind the scenes, not in the spotlight. Yet here she was, willing to stand up for him, risking her own reputation in the process. As Gwynne took the stand, Elon couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and gratitude. He had never been more thankful to have someone like her by his side. Gwynne turned to the judge and began, "Your Honor, I've worked with Elon Musk for years, and I can speak firsthand about his dedication to the companies he's built. Yes, he is an optimist, and yes, he often speaks of things that seem far beyond what others think is possible. But it's that very optimism that has propelled Tesla and SpaceX forward. Without that belief in the impossible, we wouldn't be where we are today." The room was quiet as she continued, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "Elon is not perfect. None of us are. But what he's done is not the result of some desire to mislead anyone. It's the result of his commitment to pushing the boundaries of technology and innovation. He has made mistakes, and he has admitted to them. But to say that he intended to deceive his investors, that is simply not true." Elon's heart swelled with gratitude as he listened to Gwynne's impassioned defense. It was the kind of loyalty he rarely experienced from others, and it reminded him why he trusted her implicitly. Judge Blake sat still, absorbing her words. There was no immediate response from the court, but the atmosphere shifted. For the first time in days, Elon felt a glimmer of hope. Gwynne had managed to shift the narrative, at least momentarily. She had presented Elon not as a reckless visionary but as a man who had made mistakes, but not out of malice. The prosecution, who had been poised to make their next move, seemed momentarily thrown off by Gwynne's testimony. Elon's legal team, while still cautious, couldn't help but notice the change in tone. They had expected a more direct attack from the judge, but for now, she seemed willing to listen. As the day progressed, Judge Blake allowed for more questions and cross-examinations. But the defense had been buoyed by Gwynne's unexpected testimony. Elon and his team were more confident, able to stand their ground with a little more conviction. By the end of the day, when the session adjourned, Elon felt both physically and emotionally drained. The trial wasn't over, it was far from it. But something had shifted. With Gwyn's help, he had regained some ground. The public had seen a different side of him, one that wasn't just about ambition and headline-grabbing statements. They had seen the human side of Elon Musk, the one who had been striving, working, and learning every step of the way. As they left the courthouse, Elon found himself walking alongside Gwyn, who had a knowing smile on her face. "You did well today," she said. "But don't get too comfortable. The battle's just begun." Elon chuckled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "You're right, but at least we're still in the game." Gwyn's smile widened. "And we're going to win this, one step at a time." Elon nodded, feeling the weight of the battle ahead but also the power of having an ally who truly understood him. Gwyn had stepped into the spotlight not just as his colleague, but as a friend. And for the first time in days, he felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The days following Gwyn Shotwell's testimony were a blur for Elon Musk. The courtroom had cleared, but the battle was far from over. Yet, something had changed, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just the defense. It wasn't even the prosecutor's sudden reticence. It was the way the media had begun to shift. They were starting to cover the trial from a different angle, one that favored Elon's perspective. Before Gwyn had spoken, the headlines had been relentless. Musk's unrealistic claims could cost investors billions, and Tesla CEO faces fraud allegations. The public narrative had painted him as a reckless billionaire who played fast and loose with the truth. Every time he spoke, it felt as though the press was waiting for him to slip up, hungry for his downfall. But after Gwyn's defense, the tide began to turn. Articles that had once been accusatory now offered a more nuanced view. The New York Times ran a piece titled, "Is Elon Musk a visionary, or just misunderstood?" In it, they acknowledged his tendency for audacious statements but also highlighted the undeniable impact his companies had had on the world, bringing electric cars into the mainstream and revolutionizing space travel. The headline wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a condemnation either. For the first time in weeks, it felt like he was being seen as more than just a punchline. Even CNBC ran a segment titled, "Elon Musk and the Power of Optimism in Business." It was a far cry from their usual reports, which tended to focus on his controversies. The segment explored his unconventional leadership style and how his relentless belief in the impossible had created technological advances that no one had thought possible. It didn't absolve him of responsibility, but it framed his actions in a new light, one that was more understanding of the challenges he faced. Musk had always known that perception was everything. In business, the way the public viewed you could be more important than the reality of what you did. And right now, the public perception was shifting. The media had begun to reflect the complexities of his character and his career. It wasn't just about his mistakes, it was about the bigger picture, the vision that had driven him from one ambitious project to the next. But as much as Elon appreciated the shift in the media's tone, he knew this was only the beginning. The court of public opinion could change on a dime. The media could turn again just as easily as it had embraced him. The truth of the matter was, the public was fickle, and while they might have softened on him for now, the pressure would only increase once the trial entered its next phase. The media frenzy was intense. The tabloids, ever eager to find drama, were running pieces that speculated about his relationship with his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley, and whether their divorce had impacted his decision-making at Tesla. Meanwhile, more serious outlets began to look into how Musk's other companies, like Neuralink and The Boring Company, were operating behind the scenes. Every move he made was magnified and dissected. As the trial progressed, the courtroom itself seemed like a backdrop to the larger spectacle that was unfolding in the media. Each day, the press swarmed outside the courthouse, snapping pictures and shouting questions as Musk arrived. Some reporters called out for him to explain his actions, while others simply shouted out the latest conspiracy theories. Musk's legal team had grown accustomed to it by now, but it still weighed on him. It was impossible to ignore the 24/7 coverage. For Elon, the toughest part wasn't just the trial, it was the realization that his every move was being dissected in real time. The weight of that scrutiny had begun to take its toll, chipping away at his sense of privacy. The public had always been intrigued by his larger-than-life persona, but now they were seeing him in a new, more vulnerable light. That night, Elon sat alone in his office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto. The soft hum of the city was faint in the background, but inside the glass-walled building, it felt like a different world. The weight of the trial was hanging over him, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself to think beyond the courtroom. His mind wandered to SpaceX. The mission to Mars. The promise he had made to humanity that one day, people would live on another planet. That dream had always been his true north, the guiding force that kept him moving forward. He had built everything he had because he wanted to push the limits of what was possible. He knew the road would never be easy, and the challenges would always come. But it was that vision, that belief in the impossible, that had given him purpose. And yet, as the court case raged on, he couldn't help but wonder, had he sacrificed too much in the pursuit of that vision? Was his relentless optimism the thing that was going to destroy everything he had built? The soft click of the door broke his train of thought. He looked up to see Gwynne Shotwell walking in, her face set with determination. Elon smiled faintly at her, grateful for her quiet strength. "You're still here?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Gwynne's eyes met his, unwavering. "I had some work to finish. But I wanted to talk to you." Elon raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "You're taking this too personally," she said, sitting down across from him. "You've always been about the big picture, the mission. This trial, it's just a bump in the road. You can't let it distract you from what's really important." Elon exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I know. But it feels like everything I've worked for is being questioned. I can't help but think about the bigger picture, and whether I've gone too far." Gwynne leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Elon, you're not alone in this. You've got a team. You've got people who believe in you. But you have to believe in yourself. The media, the trial, they're just noise. The only thing that matters is the mission. SpaceX. Tesla. The work you're doing. That's what's going to matter in the long run." Elon looked out the window, the lights of Palo Alto flickering in the distance. He knew she was right. He had always been driven by something bigger than himself. The trial, the media, the headlines, they were just obstacles to be overcome. What mattered was the work. What mattered was the future he was building. "I guess you're right," he said, his voice quieter now, but with a renewed sense of determination. "I've got to keep my eyes on the horizon." Gwynne smiled, her expression warm but resolute. "Exactly. Now, let's get back to work." The trial had become more than just a legal battle, it had become an unpredictable game of strategy, where every move mattered. After Gwynne Shotwell's powerful testimony, the media's shift in tone had provided Elon Musk with a rare moment of peace. But peace was a fleeting thing in the world Elon inhabited. As the trial resumed, the stakes only grew higher. There was an energy in the courtroom that was palpable, like the tension before a storm. Elon had always thrived under pressure, but this time, the pressure was different. It wasn't just his reputation on the line, it was everything he had worked for. Tesla, SpaceX, and all of his other ventures depended on the outcome of this trial. The defense had carefully planned its next steps, using Gwynne's testimony as a springboard to attack the prosecution's case. But just when they thought they had a clear path forward, a twist in the case arrived from an unexpected source. Elon was preparing for another day of testimony when his attorney, Claire Foster, called him into a side room. Her face was tense, but her voice remained composed. "Elon," she said, her eyes locked onto his. "There's something you need to know." Elon raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "There's a leak," she said quietly. "And it's not from your team." Elon's stomach dropped. He had dealt with leaks before, journalists getting hold of confidential information, insider sources making deals, but this was different. A leak from his legal team could mean disaster. It could provide the prosecution with information they weren't supposed to have, potentially compromising his defense. Claire continued, "We're not sure who, but we've traced some of the recent information about your private communications back to someone with connections to the prosecution. They've been feeding the media details about your strategies, including things we've been discussing in private." Elon's mind raced. Who could it be? Who would betray him like that? He had worked with a trusted team of lawyers and associates, and he couldn't fathom anyone on his side leaking confidential information to the other side. He stood up, pacing the small room as he tried to process this new revelation. "What are we going to do about it?" "We're doing everything we can to trace it, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, we need to stay one step ahead of them. Keep your moves unpredictable." Elon's frustration was evident, but Claire's calm demeanor was a grounding force. He took a deep breath. "All right, we keep moving forward. But we need to find out who's behind this, and fast." Claire nodded. "We will. But for now, focus on the case. The media's already questioning the credibility of this trial, and if we get caught up in leaks, it'll only add fuel to the fire." Elon knew she was right. The media was already circling like vultures, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. If they caught wind of a leak from within his own team, it would be another scandal for them to exploit. But even as he tried to push the leak from his mind, it lingered in the back of his thoughts. Who could have done this? And why? As the next day's proceedings began, Elon's unease only deepened. His legal team was on edge, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Despite the progress they had made, the prosecution was still relentless. They had brought in new evidence, seemingly out of nowhere, and Elon's defense team was scrambling to catch up. It felt like they were always playing catch-up, always on the defensive. But then, during a cross-examination, something extraordinary happened. Judge Blake, who had been the stern and unyielding figure throughout the trial, seemed to falter for the first time. As the prosecutor presented a new piece of evidence, a series of emails from Elon's private accounts, she hesitated before allowing them into the record. Elon watched as Judge Blake scanned the documents, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "these emails are from Mr. Musk's personal accounts. They show a pattern of communications with investors, in which he discusses the future of Tesla and SpaceX in overly optimistic terms, potentially misleading them." Elon's heart sank. These emails were private. They were personal. And now they were being used against him in a court of law. This wasn't just about business decisions anymore, it was about his private life, his thoughts, his personal visions for the future of his companies. But just as Judge Blake was about to make her ruling on the emails, something surprising occurred. Gwynne Shotwell stood up, her voice cutting through the tension in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I object." The courtroom fell silent, everyone turning to face Gwynne. She wasn't just an observer anymore, she had become an active participant in Elon's defense, a powerful voice in his corner. Judge Blake raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Shotwell, this is highly irregular. You're not on the witness list for today's proceedings." "I understand, Your Honor," Gwynne replied, her tone measured but firm. "But I believe these emails are being presented out of context. What they fail to show is the long-term vision Elon has always had for his companies. Yes, he may have expressed optimism, but that's because he believes in his work. These aren't emails designed to mislead anyone, they're the musings of a visionary. And if we're going to question those, we need to understand the context behind them." The prosecutor scoffed, but Judge Blake remained silent, her gaze fixed on Gwynne. There was a moment of tension in the room as the judge weighed her options. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Blake spoke. "I will allow the emails into the record, but I will also allow for a detailed analysis of their context. This trial is about the truth, and I will ensure that both sides have a fair opportunity to present their case." The prosecutor's smug expression faltered, but the damage was done. The emails were now part of the trial, and the prosecution had a new piece of ammunition. But Gwyn's intervention had reframed the narrative, forcing the court to consider the broader context of Elon's words and actions. Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The leak, the emails, the pressure from the prosecution, it was all coming together in a way he hadn't anticipated. But he wasn't going to back down. He couldn't afford to. The future of everything he had worked for was on the line, and he wasn't about to let a twist of fate determine the outcome. As the court adjourned for the day, Elon turned to Gwyn, who had returned to her seat. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere. Gwyn offered a small, reassuring smile. "We're just getting started." The trial had already reached a boiling point, and yet Elon Musk could feel the heat intensifying. With each passing day, the stakes seemed to grow higher, and the walls around him seemed to close in. But amidst the chaos, a strange feeling of determination began to take root in him. Something had shifted. He was no longer merely trying to protect himself, he was fighting for the future he had always dreamed of. As he sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, Elon found himself scrolling through his phone, reading the latest headlines. The media was still covering the trial intensely, but the tone had shifted. Instead of focusing solely on the sensationalism of the case, some reporters began to highlight the contradictions in the prosecution's arguments. There were pieces about how Musk's visionary goals for the future were often misinterpreted, or how his personal ambition had led to grand promises that sometimes didn't materialize on time. They weren't exactly defending him, but they weren't condemning him either. The narrative was beginning to waver, and for Elon, it was a glimmer of hope. But hope alone wouldn't win the case. The day began with the usual tension as Elon entered the courthouse. The crowd outside was as rowdy as ever, the flashing cameras like a constant reminder that the world was watching. He didn't mind the cameras anymore. In fact, he almost welcomed them. He was no longer the man hiding behind a polished corporate persona. The trial had stripped him of that luxury. Once inside the courtroom, things grew even more intense. The prosecution was clearly trying to push their advantage, using the leaked emails and internal communications to show that Elon had intentionally misled investors. But the defense was holding their ground, with Gwyn Shotwell's testimony remaining one of their most potent weapons. However, as the day wore on, Elon noticed something unexpected. The prosecution seemed to be faltering in their presentation. Their arguments felt weaker, their evidence less compelling. The sharp edge that had once been so confidently wielded against him was now dull. That's when it happened. A man dressed in a sharp suit entered the courtroom, drawing attention. He wasn't someone Elon recognized, but there was something about him that felt significant. The man made his way to the defense table and whispered something to Claire Foster, who immediately stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," Claire began, her voice steady, "we have a new witness for the defense. One who has crucial information about the nature of these allegations." Judge Blake looked surprised but nodded. "Proceed." The mystery man stood and walked toward the witness stand, and as he did, Elon's curiosity deepened. He hadn't been told about any new witnesses. Who was this person? And why hadn't his legal team mentioned him before? When the man sat down and was sworn in, he looked directly at Elon. He was calm, poised, with a kind of quiet confidence that suggested he had seen far more than most. His face was familiar, but Elon couldn't place him. "My name is Richard Donovan," the man said, his voice clear and authoritative. "I was a senior analyst at one of the major investment firms involved with Tesla for the last 5 years. I've had direct access to many of the financial documents that have been presented here in court. Elon's mind raced. Richard Donovan? He didn't recognize the name at first, but the title and the connection to Tesla hit him. He had heard of Donovan's firm, though he had never worked with him directly. The analyst had been a significant player in Tesla's early investment rounds, but to Elon's knowledge, he hadn't been involved in any legal proceedings. "I'm here to testify that the claims made about Mr. Musk's communication with investors, particularly regarding promises made in the emails, are not what they've been made out to be," Donovan continued. "I personally reviewed the emails in question and can say with certainty that they were not written with the intent to mislead. Rather, they were part of an ongoing, long-term dialogue with investors who were fully aware of the ambitious goals Mr. Musk had set for his companies." Elon could feel the air in the courtroom shift. This was huge. Donovan's testimony was critical. It not only countered the prosecution's claims but also provided valuable insight into the context of Elon's communications. It wasn't just about optimism, it was about the shared vision that investors had bought into. Richard Donovan continued, "While it is true that there were projections made that did not materialize on the exact timeline, that is part of any high-risk venture. In fact, many of the investors I spoke with saw this as part of the long game, a calculated risk they were willing to take. Mr. Musk's vision, while ambitious, was never presented as a guarantee. It was always clear that the timelines were aggressive. The investors knew that." Elon leaned forward in his seat, listening intently. This was the kind of testimony he needed, an ally who had insider knowledge and could speak to the reality of what had transpired. The prosecution had been framing the emails as proof of deception, but Donovan's perspective was completely different. He was painting a picture of transparency, of investors who understood the risks involved, and most importantly, of a vision that wasn't about deception, it was about reaching for the impossible. But then, the prosecutor stood up, and a new wave of tension rolled through the room. "Mr. Donovan," the prosecutor began, "you are suggesting that these investors were fully aware of the risks involved. But what about the millions of retail investors who purchased stock based on these same statements? Were they fully informed?" Donovan paused for a moment before answering. "Retail investors, like all investors, have the right to make their own decisions based on available information. That's the nature of the stock market. But the context of these emails was always clear, there was no intention to mislead anyone. Mr. Musk's communications were optimistic, yes, but that is not fraud. That is the nature of a visionary entrepreneur." The prosecutor tried to push harder, but it was clear that Donovan's testimony was weakening their case. The truth was now coming to light, and the prosecution's argument seemed to be unraveling under the weight of facts and context. Elon felt a surge of gratitude toward Donovan, who had just provided the defense with a lifeline. The analyst wasn't just helping in the court of law, he was helping Elon regain control of his narrative. The shift in the trial's atmosphere was undeniable. With each word, the tide was turning in his favor. As the day ended, Elon found himself reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. It wasn't just the lawyers or the media that had helped him. It had been the people who truly understood his work, the people who knew what it meant to take risks, to push boundaries, to dream big. In that moment, Elon realized something important: he wasn't alone in this fight. He never had been. The days after Richard Donovan's testimony were filled with tension. It was clear that the courtroom drama had taken a turn, and Elon could feel the shift. The prosecution was struggling to regain the momentum they had once held so firmly. The new information presented by Donovan had unraveled their key arguments, and for the first time since the trial began, Elon could almost taste victory. But, as always, nothing was as simple as it seemed. Despite Donovan's powerful words, the case wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun to reveal its true depth. Elon sat in his private office at SpaceX headquarters, the walls adorned with photographs of rockets and technology that had made history. The latest developments in the trial were weighing heavily on him. As he scrolled through the latest news coverage, he found a pattern that troubled him. The media was no longer solely focused on the legal aspects of the case, they were diving deeper into his personal life, his past decisions, and even his relationships with certain influential figures. It was as if the trial had become less about the law and more about attacking his character. There were whispers in the media, suggestions of ulterior motives, and rumors about how far his enemies would go to destroy him. And then, he saw it, a story about James Dyson. The headline sent a chill through him, James Dyson's long-standing rivalry with Elon Musk, the hidden battle behind the courtroom drama. Elon had known that Dyson had always been a competitor. Their paths had crossed in the world of high-tech innovation, Elon with his electric cars and space missions, Dyson with his groundbreaking vacuum cleaners and air purifiers. But reading the article made it clear that their rivalry had always been more personal than professional. Dyson had long resented Elon's meteoric rise, and many speculated that his disdain was the driving force behind the unfolding courtroom battle. But now, the media was connecting Dyson directly to the trial in a way that Elon hadn't anticipated. Dyson had been involved in behind-the-scenes efforts to discredit him, influencing the prosecution, using his wealth and connections to manipulate the narrative. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. The article detailed how Dyson had been quietly funding certain elements of the prosecution's case, paying for investigations into Elon's past business dealings, and even financing public relations campaigns designed to tarnish Musk's reputation. The connection was undeniable. For the first time, Elon felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was an all-out war, and James Dyson had taken it to a level he hadn't anticipated. But as the anger surged, so did the clarity. Dyson had underestimated him. If Dyson thought he could orchestrate this entire spectacle and get away with it, he was wrong. Elon quickly called Gwynne Shotwell, his trusted confidant and the person who had stood by his side through thick and thin. He needed to discuss what to do next, and he needed to do it quickly. "Gwynne," Elon said when she picked up, his voice tense, "we have a problem. Dyson's name is coming up in the media, and it's not good. He's been influencing the prosecution. We need to figure out how to expose him, without making it seem like a distraction from the trial." There was a moment of silence before Gwynne responded, her tone measured and calm. "Elon, this is serious. Dyson has always been a master at playing the long game. He's not just trying to win this case, he's trying to destroy everything you've built. If he's behind this, we need to gather proof. We need to tie him to every single leak and manipulation." "I'm on it," Elon replied, already feeling the wheels in his mind turning. "But we can't rush this. We need solid evidence. And if Dyson is pulling the strings, we can't just attack him without thinking it through." As Elon hung up, a sense of resolve filled him. He was used to being in control. He had built companies from nothing, created groundbreaking technology, and revolutionized entire industries. This was no different. He would expose Dyson for who he really was, and he would do it on his terms. The next few days were filled with investigation and preparation. Gwynne and the team dove deep into Dyson's business dealings, cross-referencing everything they could find with the ongoing trial. They pored over financial documents, communications, and business connections, looking for any clue that would tie Dyson directly to the manipulation of the case. As they dug deeper, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Dyson had made significant donations to political campaigns that had connections to members of the prosecution. He had been in contact with various media outlets that were pushing a negative narrative about Musk. And, perhaps most damning of all, they discovered evidence that Dyson had been working with one of the key witnesses for the prosecution, someone who had testified that Musk had misled investors. It was all starting to add up. But the final piece of the puzzle came when Gwynne discovered a series of emails between Dyson and a high-ranking member of the prosecution team. The emails were clear. They discussed strategies to weaken Elon's defense, to leverage his past mistakes against him, and to make the trial as damaging as possible to his reputation. This was the smoking gun they had been searching for. Elon read the emails for himself, his heart pounding as the weight of the discovery hit him. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was a coordinated attack, a conspiracy to take him down by any means necessary. And Dyson was at the center of it all. He knew what he had to do. The next day, as the trial resumed, Elon sat in his seat with a renewed sense of determination. He was ready. He wasn't just going to win this case, he was going to expose Dyson for the manipulative schemer he truly was. As the courtroom settled and the prosecution prepared to call their next witness, Elon's lawyer stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that will significantly alter the course of this trial. We request to present this evidence immediately." Judge Blake looked surprised but nodded. "Proceed." With that, Elon's legal team presented the emails that clearly connected James Dyson to the prosecution's efforts to discredit Musk. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read through the documents, and for the first time in the trial, the defense had the upper hand. The prosecutor, visibly shaken, attempted to respond, but the damage had already been done. The courtroom was buzzing with disbelief. The trial had taken an unexpected turn, and the mastermind behind the entire charade had been exposed. Elon's eyes locked onto the prosecutor, and then, to his surprise, they shifted to the back of the courtroom. James Dyson was sitting there, his face pale and his jaw clenched. The truth was out. And now, it was time for him to answer for his actions. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. Elon Musk had always thrived in the face of challenge, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. For the first time in the trial, the tables had been turned, and the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy, James Dyson, had been exposed. But despite the newfound momentum, Elon knew this battle was far from over. As the judge ordered a brief recess to allow time for the prosecution to review the new evidence, the courtroom emptied, but Elon remained seated, his mind racing. The emails linking Dyson to the prosecution's manipulation were irrefutable. This was his moment, the one he had been waiting for. Yet, he understood that it wasn't just about winning the case now. It was about reclaiming his legacy and securing his vision for the future. Gwynne Shotwell, standing by his side, offered him a brief, reassuring smile. "We've got him, Elon. We just need to make sure we press this advantage. The prosecution can't recover from this." Elon nodded, but there was no time to celebrate. He could already hear the murmurs of the media outside the courtroom. The world was watching, and this was the moment that could define everything. As the recess ended, the courtroom filled again, the air charged with the weight of the revelation. The prosecution had clearly been caught off guard, but they couldn't afford to appear weak now. They would fight back, try to discredit the evidence, and attempt to shift the narrative. Elon knew this. It was the final stretch, and the war was still ongoing. "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor began, his voice shaky but firm, "we request additional time to review this newly presented evidence. We need to determine the authenticity of these claims." Judge Blake's eyes narrowed. "You've had more than enough time to prepare for this trial. You will proceed. This case has gone on long enough." The defense team, with Elon's lawyer leading the charge, presented their argument, that Dyson's influence on the prosecution had tainted the entire case. It was clear to everyone now that the case against Elon had been orchestrated with malice, driven by personal vendettas. Gwynne Shotwell stood to make her statement next, taking center stage with her calm, authoritative presence. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not just a case of financial misconduct, it is a deliberate effort to sabotage one man's vision. Mr. Musk's career, his ambitions, and his legacy have been the target of a personal vendetta. Mr. Dyson's involvement has compromised the integrity of this trial." There was a palpable shift in the room. The jury seemed to be listening intently, processing the magnitude of the revelation. They were no longer just witnesses to a legal battle, they were witnesses to something far larger, the unveiling of a conspiracy, the unraveling of a well-crafted scheme. Dyson had underestimated the power of the truth, and now, there was no hiding from it. Elon leaned forward in his seat, his gaze never leaving Dyson, who was sitting at the back of the room, looking more uncomfortable than ever. The once confident billionaire now looked like a man caught in a web of his own making. But even as Elon prepared to strike the final blow, he felt a pang of uncertainty. It wasn't just Dyson who had conspired against him. There were many others, many forces working behind the scenes to derail his success. The trial had revealed a darker side of the business world, one where personal grudges and rivalries often took precedence over truth and justice. The defense team worked tirelessly to present a clear and compelling case. They showcased the manipulation, the financial games Dyson had played, and the ways in which the prosecution had colluded with him. Every piece of evidence was meticulously laid out. It wasn't just a legal victory that was at stake, it was the restoration of Elon's reputation. And then came the moment. As the defense closed their case, the room was silent, the tension unbearable. Elon knew this was it. The final showdown was at hand. It was time for him to speak for himself. He stood up slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the courtroom floor. For a moment, the room held its breath. No one expected Elon Musk to speak. His lawyers had handled everything so far. But this was personal. This was his fight. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. I've spent my life building things that many thought were impossible. From electric cars to rockets, I've always tried to do the unthinkable. But what I've learned through this trial is that the real challenge isn't about breaking barriers or changing industries. The real challenge is fighting for what's right, even when the world is against you. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, landing on Dyson, who now looked like a man on the defensive, his arrogance replaced with palpable unease. You see, this trial isn't about me, Elon continued. It's about something much bigger. It's about truth. It's about accountability. It's about standing up to those who think they can manipulate the system to destroy someone because of their own petty grievances. This trial isn't about me as an individual, it's about a vision for the future. A vision that I've devoted my life to. A vision that's more important than any personal attack or any rival's envy. Elon's words hit with the force of a truth that had been suppressed for too long. The jury listened intently, and the air in the courtroom seemed to shift, as if the weight of his words had turned the tide entirely. For the first time in the trial, Elon felt a sense of peace. He had fought for what he believed in, and now, the rest of the world could see the truth too. As he finished speaking, the courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Blake seemed moved by the sincerity in Elon's voice. The defense had done its part. The evidence was irrefutable. The jury was left with one question: who was the true villain in this story? The man who had created revolutionary technologies, or the man who had manipulated the system for personal gain? Elon sat down, his heart racing as the jury deliberated. Outside, the world waited with bated breath. In that moment, he realized that no matter what the outcome, he had already won. The truth was out, and the story had been told. The room was silent as the jury filed back into the courtroom. Every eye in the place was fixed on the 12 individuals who had been tasked with determining Elon Musk's fate. The tension was palpable, and the weight of the moment hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Elon could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had fought too hard for too long to back down now. The judge, her expression stern and unreadable, motioned for everyone to stand. The defense team gathered around Elon, offering their silent support, while the prosecution sat with their heads lowered, their faces resigned. Dyson, seated at the back, avoided Elon's gaze, his once smug demeanor replaced by an unsettling nervousness. Judge Blake's voice broke the silence. The jury has reached a verdict. Will the foreperson please stand? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a calm yet determined demeanor, rose to her feet. We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of all charges. The words echoed through the room, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Elon felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by a rush of emotions that he had kept at bay for weeks. The pressure, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it melted away in that single, definitive moment. But there was more to this moment than just the legal victory. It wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about something deeper, something more personal. Elon had fought for his freedom, for the future he believed in, and for the legacy he wanted to leave behind. And now, with this verdict, he had reclaimed that future. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of reactions. Some people whispered excitedly, while others sat in stunned silence. The prosecution seemed deflated, their defeat evident. Dyson, too, appeared to shrink back, no longer the confident figure he had been just days ago. For all his scheming, for all his efforts to bring Elon down, he had been exposed, and the truth had triumphed. Judge Blake turned to Elon. "Mr. Musk, you are free to go. You've been acquitted of all charges, and this case is officially closed." Elon nodded solemnly, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. He had come out on top, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The trial was over, but the fight for the future, his vision, was far from finished. As Elon stood up to leave the courtroom, Gwyn Shotwell, his trusted ally, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Elon," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You fought for what was right, and the truth won." Elon gave her a small, tired smile. "We did it. All of us." As he walked out of the courtroom, a wave of reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrusting toward him. But Elon didn't flinch. He had been through worse. He had built empires and launched rockets into space. This was just another challenge he had overcome. A reporter shouted out, "Elon, now that you've been acquitted, what's next for you?" Elon's eyes scanned the crowd, and he took a deep breath before answering. "The future. Always the future." He didn't need to say anything more. The world understood. The victory wasn't just a legal one, it was a statement about the power of resilience, of vision, and of never backing down in the face of adversity. In the weeks that followed, the world watched as Elon Musk continued to rise above the chaos of the trial. His companies, including Tesla and SpaceX, saw a resurgence in stock value and public interest. The media, once focused on the scandal of the trial, shifted its gaze back to his groundbreaking work in technology and space exploration. But what stood out most was the way Elon had handled the trial itself. It wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about exposing the truth, standing firm in the face of personal attacks, and refusing to let anyone, no matter how powerful, tear down what he had worked so hard to build. James Dyson, on the other hand, found himself facing the fallout of his actions. The media scrutinized him, exposing his role in the manipulation of the trial. His reputation, once revered in the tech world, was now in tatters. It seemed that no amount of wealth or influence could shield him from the consequences of his own greed and deceit. For Elon, the trial had been a crucible, testing not just his legal defenses but his resolve as a person. And in the end, he emerged stronger, his character unscathed, his vision for the future clearer than ever. As Elon sat in his office late one evening, overlooking the bustling headquarters of SpaceX, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The trial had been one of the most difficult and painful experiences of his life, but it had also been a profound reminder of why he did what he did, to push the boundaries of what was possible, to fight for a better future, and to never give up, no matter the obstacles. He thought about the people who had stood by him throughout the ordeal, Gwyn, his legal team, his family, and he realized that this victory wasn't just his own. It was the result of a collective effort, a testament to the power of loyalty, integrity, and hard work. But as he looked toward the future, he knew that the real work was just beginning. There were still so many challenges to overcome, so many barriers to break. The road ahead would not be easy, but Elon Musk was no stranger to adversity. He had faced it before, and he would face it again. And through it all, he would continue to reach for the stars. The trial may have been over, but his journey was far from finished. As Elon Musk gazed out at the stars that night, a smile crept across his face. He had fought the hardest battle of his life, and he had won. But it was never really about the trial. It was about something far greater, the pursuit of the future. The world was watching, and the world was waiting for what came next. And Elon Musk was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?